You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
How's the German election going for Angela Merkel, who is no more's party? Well, almost as bad as the Labour conference is going for Sir Keir Starmer, QC MP. At least by all accounts, though more news might break in the course of the show this evening. We'll keep you updated, of course. It's neck and neck in the German election. 25% for Angela Merkel's once hegemonic party, the lowest they have ever polled since the Second World War. 25% also for the Social Democrats, with a danger of the left-wing party, Die Linke, dropping out of the Bundestag altogether, currently on the exit polls at 5%. Please note, none of this includes the postal vote, which is over 40%. What could possibly go wrong? Ask Donald Trump. Ask me. Ask anyone who's ever fought Labour in the inner cities. We'll see. The Labour Party has come a cropper, not just on the issue of the public ownership of the energy distribution industry, supported by the overwhelming majority of the British public, but not by the leader of the Labour Party. And, as we'll be talking to the great Roger Waters about, Stephen Donziger is in court this week. And in a couple of weeks, so is Julian Assange. Yahoo have just revealed facts that will make your hair stand on end. It's the mother of all talk shows, all right.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Angela Merkel is no more. She has bestrode European politics for 16 years. Take that, Margaret Thatcher. And her party has had an almost automatic right to rule for all of that time. It may well lose office, if not power, this evening, though the baffling traffic light coalitions that are being discussed may mean that they stay in there in a coalition government. The big winners appear to be the Social Democrats, once on the floor at around 10%, 11% in the public opinion polls. They appear to have scored 25%, which is pitiful if you think of it, but might actually give them the chancellorship. Or will it have to go to the so-called Greens? Although they're anybody's, they might actually go into coalition with the right wing as with the centre-left. They might be left at the post altogether in a grand national coalition. They're still counting in the elections there. We'll bring you up to date if any more news emerges. But the fate of German politics is of very great importance to all the people of Europe, including the people of Britain. The direction of the European Union is at stake also, not least because President Macron faces a very difficult re-election in France in the next few months. But if the Social Democrats in Germany have done better than expected, the Social Democrats in Britain have had a disastrous conference so far. Their wooden leader, Keir Starmer, robotic and almost an artificial intelligence on the British political scene, has presided over a fiasco this weekend. First, he said that he wanted to change the rules for the election of leader of the party, scrap the system that gave him the leadership in order to make it effectively impossible for anyone to the left of him ever to be leader again. Part of an ongoing purge, scourge, the scourging of Labour is what is going on now. Cue panic amongst putative leaders after him, because most observers agree. Even desperate Dan Hodges today wrote Keir Starmer off and said it was time for him to go. Putative challengers like Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester, and like Angela Rayner, one Angela goes, another one thinks that her hour has come. As the deputy leader of the Labour Party, she issued forth a blood-curdling description of the majority of the British people. She called them Tories, but she was really speaking to their voters when she described them as racist, misogynistic scum. Now, she said it was kind of just northern banter, but that is, of course, not how it's been taken, not least by her own leader, who's promised to have a word with her. But this is all virtue signalling to the Labour members. Vote for me, says Angela. I'm a real class fighter. I'm so poor, my mother used to serve me dog food because she couldn't read the labels. Gave me jelly and shaving cream because she couldn't read the labels. I'm so poor, says Angela, I would have been taken into care in today's world, except that wouldn't have happened because there's not enough social workers to check up on children in vulnerable households like she once was. Pregnant at 15 while still at school. All of these are signals for Angela Rayner's forthcoming Labour leadership campaign challenge. But it's all the narcissism of the small difference. What Freud called the magnification of small differences to make people imagine that a real choice, a real dichotomy is in play here. The truth is, you couldn't slip sixpence between the two cheeks of the same backside in British politics. And the same is true, essentially, in the United States of America between the Republicans and the Democrats. Therefore, they have to magnify, they have to megaphone such small differences as exist to fool the public. That's the truth of the matter. I'm more northern than Angela Rayner. I'm just as working class as Angela Rayner. And I don't go around calling my political opponents scum, not least because I'm trying to win their voters over to my point of view. And calling someone a misogynistic, racist piece of scum is probably the least likely way of achieving that. Indeed, Labour has been on that course as a whole, left and right, for so many decades now. It might very well be true that the next Labour Prime Minister is yet to be born. I don't call my political opponents scum because, well, I think it's dangerous. It's the language of civil war. After all, if someone is a misogynistic, racist piece of scum, then why are we sharing the same air with them in debates and arguments? Why are we sitting in Parliament with them? Why aren't we organising a revolution to overthrow them? You see where this all leads? But I'll tell Angela what a better description of scum would be. Picture a politician who was a complete nobody, utterly obscure. No one had ever heard of them. And a leader comes to power and gives them a place in the sun, puts them on the front bench, promotes them, gives them titles, shares platforms with them. And then that politician stabs his or her patron in the back multiple times. That politician has secret dinners with, say, someone called Lord Cashpoint, a supporter of everything that politician pretended to oppose. Lord Cashpoint was the benefactor of, and indeed the financial organizer of, the very Tony Blair that the young politician purported to despise. And at those secret dinners, a plot was hatched, which came to fruition and which led to the overthrow of that politician's former patron, led to his expulsion from the Labour Party, and led to the complete rout of everyone associated with them, including that politician's own flatmate, a former member of the front bench just like him or her. A betrayer, an apostate, a backstabber, a liar and a deceiver. Angela, that's what would be scum. Enough of these pretenders, imposters. Why do I even care? Well, I care because every country needs an opposition, and Labour sure ain't anybody's idea of an opposition. Perhaps we'll come back to that later. Perhaps in the context of the poll that we're running. Who will be the next Labour Prime Minister? Angela Rayner, Andy Burnham, or C. Not born yet? You can vote on my Twitter feed, on my Telegram, on my YouTube channel right now on that. I want to turn to more globally significant matters. Stephen Donziger has been under house arrest for 3 whole years. If you're a regular viewer and listener, you already know that because we have regularly featured him on the show. To call him a martyr to corporate power would be to understate it. Chevron have basically bought their own court, their own judges, their own bailiffs, and have managed to keep a man who's not even charged by the criminal justice system locked up in his own house for 3 whole years, unable to live a normal life, unable to work, entirely dependent on the goodwill of those who have supported his case, including our first guest, the one and only legendary Roger Waters. He's up in court this week, Stephen Donziger. What is this private court going to do next? 3 years of house arrest? What's next? Devil's Island? The guillotine? All without a single by your leave from the Attorney General of the United States or any legitimate public justice system court. It's going to be important, that court case, because it's going to delineate the boundaries of corporate power and private justice in the United States of America. It's an important case. But important as it is, it's not as important as the epic piece of journalism published today by Yahoo News. Not the Communist Workers' Party Daily, not the Russian media, but by Yahoo News. A 3-header written after a great deal of research and interviews with more than 30 US intelligence officials, as well as politicians, White House staffers, and politicians in and around the administration of Donald Trump and Joe Biden. It is an epic piece of work. And it reveals, I say reveals, but again, regular viewers and listeners already know that Julian Assange, the truth teller, the publisher, the journalist, has been subjected to the most remorseless campaign of persecution ever known since the invention of the printing press, since men and women began to communicate with each other in writing. All because he told the truth, the uncomfortable truths that the powerful never wanted you to know. Julian Assange has been subjected to set up, frame up, false accusations, incarceration, cruel torture, kidnap, rendition, 2 years in Belmarsh, maximum security jail, facing extradition, facing a 145-year prison sentence in the internal Guantanamo in Colorado. He's been spied upon. He's been betrayed. He's been sold by the former president of Ecuador. But what we didn't know, in the detail we now know, thanks to this piece in Yahoo, is that at the very highest levels of the American government, serious discussions took place about whether or not it would be legal, and if legal, practicable, to murder him in London, in the Ecuador embassy, at the highest level, in the presence of the President of the United States. Discussions driven by the former Secretary of State, Fat Mikey Pompeo, in his capacity as head of the CIA and as Secretary of State of the United States of America. Whether to murder a journalist in London, in an embassy, whether it would be legal, and if legal, practicable. Go away, don't censor yourselves, said Pompeo. Give me the options of how we could murder a journalist in London, in an embassy, the sovereign territory of a third country. If not murder him, then kidnap him. Illegally, extraordinarily rendition him through a black prison where we could rid ourselves of this turbulent priest. These discussions took place over years. The building was bugged. My conversations with Assange were bugged. Pamela Anderson having a pee in the toilet of the embassy was bugged. Every move that Julian Assange made was illegally bugged and watched in real time by American intelligence officials. It's all in the article. Julian's children's nappies were stolen so they could get the DNA and establish his fatherhood of those children. You feel me? This was all happening. Now, if you were one of these liberals, progressives, leftists, who lent yourself to this remorseless persecution, murder plots, kidnap plots, illegal spying of Julian Assange, hang your head now in shame. If you were one of those people that followed me around with placards, Julian Assange is a rapist, hang your heads now in shame. History has already absolved Julian Assange and those like me that love him and supported him. We're already absolved, but for you, the chickens are coming home to roost. The article reveals that the Americans and the British were agreed upon a shootout on the streets of London if the Russians managed to get Julian into a diplomatic car and drive him to an airfield to fly him to Russia. Now, I don't know if Russia ever had such a plan. If they did, hats off to them. God bless you, Squire. Well done, the Kremlin, if they did. I don't know if, as the report states, Julian turned down such an escape plan. If he did, he was foolish to do so. If he'd asked me, I would have told him to go ahead with it. But if it had happened, American and British officials openly, well, not openly, openly amongst themselves, discussed a gun battle on the streets of London, the shooting of the tires of a Russian embassy motor car, the shooting of the tires of a Russian aeroplane if he managed to get to the airfield, the hovering of a helicopter over the aircraft to make sure it couldn't take off. This was all discussed for years at the highest levels of the British and American governments. And guess who was one of the participants in the discussions? None other than Her Majesty's Leader of the Opposition, then the Director of Public Prosecutions, Sir Keir Starmer, QC. And some fools wonder why I despise him. Now, first question. On this day in 1969, the Beatles' last album was released. What was it called? A, Abbey Road. B, Yesterday. C, The Last Waltz. Answers right after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Peter says the Afghan people have lost, George. I thought you were better than this, to be honest. Give me a call, Peter. Tell me what you mean. And Oliver says, for some reason, George was on the jihadist side when it came to Yugoslavia. And that's the reason I will never trust him. I fought against the war on Yugoslavia with all my breath and all my heart. Me and Tony Benn and Jeremy Corbyn and others were practically the only people in this country opposing the war on Yugoslavia, the destruction of Yugoslavia. How dare you, you imbecile? If you have any guts, you'll pick up the phone right now and call this show and justify that utter slander. Really. And Yoda says, love the show. Best entertainment and education on the airwaves.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
On this day in 1969, the Beatles' last album was released, and it was called Abbey Road, of course. Now, some podcast news. The podcast had another incredible week with a rise of 14% in total downloads. That's on top of last week's 10% increase, making us not only one of the fastest growing political programs on screens and on radio, but now in podcasts too. We're now one of the top political podcasts, not just in the UK, but also in Switzerland, Japan, Germany, Thailand, Taiwan, and believe it or not, the UAE. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts, and remember to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And why not leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts? If you're a Spotify user, please follow us and share with your friends so more people can enjoy Moats. The poll's going Great guns. Who will be the next Labour PM? Angela Rayner, 6%. That's right, the class warrior who calls her opponents human scum, 6%. Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, 31%. But by far, the majority of people agree with me that the next Labour Prime Minister is not born yet. You can vote on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube, and on my Telegram channel. Let's take a call, though, from Jantillo in Madrid. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, sorry, George. It's Ignacio. I rang you last week as well to talk about Afghanistan and the origins of this endless war.
It's Ignacio. I got your name wrong. Please forgive me.
No problem. So, George, what I wanted to say today was that the actions of the U.S. administration in Afghanistan in the 70s blew back against them in 9/11.
Sure.
But also 7/7 was a direct result of the actions in 77 when they created the monster of Islamic fundamentalism.
All true. I agree, all true. That doesn't absolve the mass murderers, of course.
No, of course it doesn't. Also Madrid, March 11, 2004, there was an attack in the commuter with
on the trains, yeah.
191 people killed.
Yeah, and your Prime Minister lied about it for political reasons.
Yeah, there were elections 4 days later. He thought that if the people related those crimes with the invasion of Iraq, which he supported, he thought he would be finished.
Yeah.
And so he was telling lies. But I wanted to talk about something else, George.
Yeah.
The 20-year campaign, of course, was also a direct consequence of the creation of the Taliban and bin Laden. But if you fast forward to 2008, with the financial crash, after 7 years of campaign in Afghanistan, there came the cuts to education with increased tuition fees, with cuts to the healthcare, to the NHS, which then resulted in 120,000 deaths, preventable deaths, in the UK. All of that was because there was no money for healthcare, no money for education, because we enter a 10-year so-called austerity. But George, one of the reasons why there was no money for the NHS and for education was because they spent it, they wasted it in the campaign in Afghanistan.
Very good points, Ignacio. We spent, it's funny, when I argue for higher workers for truck drivers, people say, what about inflation? Nobody ever says, what about inflation from spending literally trillions of dollars on death and destruction and the corruption that goes with it? We beggared our own people by laying waste to other people. Very powerfully argued. Thank you from Madrid. Sarkar is in Glasgow. Hey, Sarkar, we made you famous a few weeks ago. You're back for more. George. Go ahead.
George, first of all, thank you so much, for taking my call. Sometimes I miss your show, but I was the next day on YouTube. George, it's a very, I don't know what do you call it? It's a very, kind of a tricky question. I don't know what to do, how to say this. Nicola Sturgeon has made a career of poking Westminster in the eye with a needle every time as per her whims and fancies. Saying so, the health, which is devolved in Scotland, and many other things, like the legal system and many other things, and the police, the health crisis is one of the worst in Scotland. Hamza Yusuf, one of the health secretary, has said, call the ambulance only if it's necessary. And now Nicola Sturgeon wants to use the British Army so they can do the ambulance, beat or, running around.
They're already, the soldiers are now driving ambulances in Scotland. Soldiers from the British Army are driving ambulances that are entirely bedecked in a language that only 0.7% of Scotland can actually speak. namely Gaelic. Everything is virtue signalling for the nationalist project.
And you know, George, what's even more scary? See, sometimes the sheep follow the shepherd, even if the shepherd is driving you off the cliff. Biggest ship in Scotland, which will be used for Scotland, is not being built in Scotland. Ports were supposed to be opened in Scotland. Wales, England, Northern Ireland agreed. But supposedly, according to Nicola Sturgeon's idea, it was not ticking all the boxes of the environmental crisis. And that's why the port will not be built in tandem with the British governments, but they will fund their own ports. A country who cannot manage their own health crisis with ambulance will be building their own ports. Now, people might think this guy is cracking a joke, but it's a tragedy. What is going on with the people, George? Why are people following her right down the cliff? Even Piper
I don't think they are following her. I'm absolutely convinced, 100% convinced. I'd stake my house on it that we've passed peak Scottish nationalism. The numbers in the polls show it, and if you include the people who don't say, don't know, uncertain, and so on, which in 2014 in the referendum broke our way by a margin of 9-1. We are right back where we started 7 years ago at 55-45, maybe even 56-44, 57-43. But you can measure it in another way, Sarkar. Marches and protests and demonstrations that only 4 years ago were attracting 100,000 people are now scarcely attracting 1,000. Demonstrations that were commanding the support of thousands in cities like Dundee, for example, this year's was fewer than 200. Wings over Scotland. If you haven't read their valedictory article, I urge you to do so. It takes a heart of stone not to laugh, although it's an extremely well-written and very, very powerful indictment in which whole sections of the Scottish nationalist so-called movement are basically surrendering. Basically, it's Flodden all over again. They are heading for home. And they know that Britain will not ever again allow itself easily to be sundered, torn apart, partitioned. That which happened in 2014 will never happen in that form ever again. There may be tests of opinion, there may be referenda in generations to come, but they will never again be yes, no. Do you want Scotland to be an independent country? Yes or no. That will never happen again. It will never happen again that Scots serving in the armed forces in England or in Germany or in Cyprus will not be given a vote. It will never happen again that Scots living in England, paying taxes in Britain, will not be allowed to vote. All of these things will never happen again. So don't despair, Sarkar. The main problem is, as you describe it, we have no war, no peace. There is no path to separatism, but we have a separatist coalition in power, time after time after time, running the country into the ground. Big problem, but only the Scots can solve it. Thanks for the call from Glasgow. Let's go to Cheshire and hear from Wayne in Cheshire. Go ahead, Wayne.
Hello, George. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
It's about the Julian Assange scenario.
Yeah.
I truly believe that if the Yanks and us wanted to kill him, he would be dead already. The reason why they haven't done is because I believe he has, and I've heard he has a dead man's switch.
He definitely has a dead man's switch. I can confirm that.
Oh, right. And the reason is because, number one, I think WikiLeaks has the truth of human history itself, the truth of religion through the Vatican and Jesus, etc., UFOs, aliens most importantly, and last but not least, a man called Dr. Hans Kammler and the Phil Society, with technology which they have been running since the 1950s, the Space Force?
I think that's all utter nonsense, Wayne, and I'm sorry that you, as it were, besmirched this important issue with that bonkers call. Let me read some of the social media. Vob says, I'm in my 50s. I doubt I'll live long enough to see another Labour government. Starmer is just a symptom. From head to toe, the party is rotten. Every regional, every key area, the right control the party with a single mission: to stop the left. And Dan McCauley says, when Andy Burnham helped get the Hillsborough campaign, he got Liverpool's vote. And David Jones says, don't fancy Rayner or Burnham, but I think not born yet is a bit harsh. Call me up, David, and tell us why. Helen Mandley says, I'd like to see Bergen be leader one day. And Fizzy Pickles says, we no longer have a Labour Party. Thatcher was right when she said New Labour was one of her greatest achievements. What the neoliberal capitalists cannot seize, they undermine or destroy. And Scotta says, don't know if she wants to be leader, but I could vote for Rachel Reeves MP. Seriously? No problem. Just a pity there are so many nut jobs in the party that make it impossible to vote Labour at all. And Pepe Q. Kennedy says, you're kidding me. We're on the edge of the result of the shadow war over the Great Reset, and you want people to choose a politician to support. I'm sorry, that went right over my head. Man of Kent says the year 3055 is a long way off, George. Now, let me give you question 2. This is the week in 1975 that Muhammad Ali retained his world heavyweight boxing title, beating Joe Frazier in their third fight. Where was it held? A, New York, B, Manila, C, Zaire. I'll tell you where I was. I was in a cinema. How primitive were communications in those days? In the middle of the night, in Blackpool, at the Labour Party conference, watching it live. But where was it coming from? New York, Manila, or Zaire? Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Downloads of the podcast, huge numbers are downloading this week's highlights in the UK and in the US, but also in countries like Japan, India, Denmark, Saudi Arabia. You probably get executed for that. Korea, Switzerland, the UAE, and Hong Kong in China. Thank you for all the great reviews you've been leaving on Apple Podcasts, and including this one. In British politics, Mr. Galloway stands as the last bastion of sense. Like a fine wine, he gets better with age. I have been a fan of his since 2002. I would recommend anyone to listen to him. The best podcast around. Thank you very much indeed. That was touching testimony. Thank you so much. If you do listen, give a 5-star review. Why don't you?
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast with George Galloway.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want the court to talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
It was, of course, the thriller in Manila. Now, the poll, who'll be the next Labour Prime Minister? Angela Rayner, 5%, down 1. Andy Burnham, 31%. C, not born yet, 64% up one. 1,200 people have voted on my Twitter, on my YouTube, and on my Telegram channel. Now, we're still trying to reach Roger Waters, but up next is a man with just as much star quality. It's Kevin Maher, who's up at the Labour Party conference, author and analyst of all things Ireland, as well as a few things Labour. Kevin Maher, thank you for joining us. I'll not ask you to play your guitar in lieu of Roger Waters, but you're looking marvellous, I must say. Before we turn to Ireland, let's go to the war zone, war-torn Labour conference in Brighton. What do you make of the show so far?
It's been a very difficult week to begin with, and as I say, difficult week. We're still on Sunday. It's been very difficult for Keir Starmer so far. He's obviously tried to bring forward some pretty big internal party changes, which have run into the sand with opposition from the left of the party, but also from a noticeable silence from people who might be his erstwhile allies. How much of this actually cuts through with the general public is a moot point, really. And it's all to play for, I suspect, for him on Wednesday when he addresses the conference, which will be for the first time, obviously, given the COVID lockdown. It's the first time he's had the chance to actually stand at the podium for an hour or so and actually lay out his stall to the British people. So you know, we'll see what happens close of play Wednesday. But you know, British politics is going through quite a tumultuous period. You know, we're down to kind of one word, really. Brexit, COVID, Boris have dominated the last 5 or 6 years. And looking at the opinion polls today, you know, the Conservatives still have a pretty decent lead in the polls, given we've got all the problems that we've got that are stemming from Brexit and from COVID, fuel shortages and the like. I've driven down here to Brighton on England's south coast this afternoon, and I've passed by 20 or so service stations coming down the M1 from the north of England, and every single one of them has run out of fuel. So the government's got some real domestic issues to grapple with. That's usually a great opportunity for an opposition leader to make hay and make capital and actually set themselves up as an alternative government. So really, it's all down to Keir Starmer on Wednesday to pull off the performance of a lifetime.
It would have to be the performance of any lifetime, judging by the local council election results, real votes from real people. Every Thursday, they seem to get worse and worse. But even our old friend, Desperate Dan Hodges, in the Mail on Sunday, has finally called time on Keir Starmer. He quotes him as saying, "I don't get politics, I don't understand it, I don't like it." That seems to me to be the message written on Keir Starmer's face most of the time.
Well, he's got a huge problem. He's not only dealing with the aftermath of the 2019 election, where obviously Labour was reduced to its lowest number of MPs since 1935. He's got a longer-term problem for the Labour Party. The Labour Party has been in power between 1997 and 2010, 13 years. We had the financial crisis there at the end. And you know, Labour, as it was in the 1950s and was in the 1980s, is kind of looking inwards and asking what kind of a party it is. Is it a party that wants to make incremental change and work with the grain, or is it a party that wants to make transformational change and actually tip the apple cart up? And you know, this is a question the Labour Party goes through every generation. So in a sense, there's nothing new here. I mean, British politics is an agglomeration of interests. Because of the system we've got, the first past the post system, the party of the right, the Conservatives, and the party of the left, Labour, have got to agglomerate huge amounts of political space and huge amounts of difference of opinion as well, and synthesising all of that and producing something that can actually win an election is a huge challenge for the Labour Party. And the Conservative Party historically has just been much better at it. You know, the Tories take a view of what's unpopular, leaders or policies, they just ditch them and they move on. Labour finds that much, much harder to do. And this process is dragged out for a huge number of years. I mean, the party's been in opposition now since 2010. So we're in the kind of 11th year of opposition and political futility in a sense. The opportunity arises, though, because of the impact of COVID and the impacts of Brexit and some of the problems that the current government has got, that actually if the Labour Party gets its act together in the next 18 months, there is a huge opportunity to win the next general election or to do certainly considerably better than the party managed in recent times. But at the moment, it's a party that's looking inwards and tearing strips off each other. I mean, there's no way of hiding that. And parties that are divided simply aren't going to win an election. So the problem for Labour is to restore some equilibrium, to restore some sense of discipline and common purpose from across its different tribes, because the opportunity is there, because we've got a government that's making quite a hash of things at the moment.
Well, of course, famously, if my auntie had a beard, she'd be my uncle. We'll see how that all pans out. But haunting the conference, like Banquo's ghost, is of course one Jeremy Corbyn, the former leader. Indeed, he was the leader just 2 years ago. Now he's not even a Labour MP, kicked out by Keir Starmer. But the Labour Party hasn't kicked him out. Only Keir Starmer has kicked him out. This is all indicative of half in, half out, semi-detached, willing to wound but not to kill. The Labour Party must be heading, surely, for a final reckoning on these things. Otherwise, you're going to have this Banquo's ghost haunting your party until the end of time, until the end of his time, anyway.
That's true. I mean, it's a fair point to say. Actually, you've got a kind of Jeremy Corbyn in a halfway house. He was suspended from the party, then brought back into the party, then suspended from the parliamentary party. Where he remains currently suspended. But of course, he's a darling of the conference fringe, even tonight as well. So yes, it's a problem. It's a mess. The Labour Party, as you well know, George, is a coalition of interests stemming from democratic socialists, social democrats, different geographies, people with often quite different views of politics and political life. And the Labour Party is always at its best when it can amalgamate these different interests and synthesize them and produce something that everybody can live with. That's when it wins elections in the 1960s and in the 1990s as well. When it doesn't do that well, it becomes quite vociferous and divided, and people question whether they're actually in the right party because they disagree with people within the same party so fundamentally. The Tory party is just much, much better at concealing its difficulties and its internal tribulations and internal wounds. Labour plays them all out in open for everybody to see. But I mean, the bottom line is in democratic politics is the voters are always looking. And if the voters don't like what you're offering, or they just say, look, you're a disorganised rabble and you can't even agree amongst yourselves, you're not going to win an election. And if you can't win an election, that should be just as much an issue of concern for Keir Starmer as it is for Jeremy Corbyn or anybody on the left, as it is for anybody on the Labour right as well, because that means political redundancy. And unfortunately, that's the kind of ground Labour's in at the moment, that it looks as though it's more interested in its internal wrangling than it does in providing an offer for the country to unite around. Now, as I say, we're potentially 18 months away from a general election where the public will have a say over COVID, over the impacts of Brexit, over the impacts of Boris Johnson's premiership. And it feels to me like there's a genuine moment there where a lot of people might say, look, I'm looking for an alternative to that. And it's up to Labour really to provide that alternative. And that's the bottom line for the party. And that's how British politics works, I'm afraid.
But they seem to have an almost masochistic, certainly fetishistic attachment to going against the grain. Angela Rayner's rant might have won her some more voters, though not according to our poll, in any Labour leadership campaign, but won't have won her any voters at all amongst the electorate. Keir Starmer's rejection today of public ownership. You and I are both old enough to remember the central electricity generating board, publicly owned, and doing a grand job in distributing power in the country. He rejected any going back to public ownership of the energy distribution sector. He also, I don't know whether to laugh or cry, he rejected Andrew Marr's point that only women have cervixes. He said that's not right. Like a mad professor. He couldn't explain why it wasn't right, because it very obviously is right in terms of science and biology. Why do they fix themselves to such unpopular points of view?
It's a very good question. I mean, just on the last point, I mean, I think we've reached a point where people are elevating sociology over biology, and I think that's the nub of that debate. I mean, it's interesting that if you roll back 3 or 4 years, it was a Conservative government. It was a Conservative minister in Justice Greening, who was then the Equalities Minister, who brought forward a Green Paper about self-identification for trans people, which very nearly ended up on the statute book without any real interrogation or public discussion. And it's interesting that the Conservative Party has resiled a very long way from that position today, and Labour, alas, is ripping itself to bits on these points, which to the general public just seem frankly mad. They seem so abstract and so self-absorbed and delusional that they look and sort of say, well, if that's the kind of thing that you think is important, rather than jobs or housing or the cut to universal credit, for example, if you think those issues are more important than everyday real issues that affect real people and real families, then are you fit to govern? And that's the nub of Labour's dilemma. It needs to get onto ground which reflects the realities of the British public, but also of those very many seats, particularly in the north of England and the East and West Midlands, that Labour lost often for the first time ever in 2019. It's got to win all these places back. Never mind winning back Scotland, which of course is I know a cause close to your heart, George. But I mean that seems a million miles away right now. Now that's how Labour produces a coalition that can actually govern the country, that pulls together Scotland, the north of England, the industrial heartlands, and enough middle class marginals in the south of England to actually govern. That's how it's done it in the past. And at the moment, it looks like a very tall order to pull all that together.
Now, you're the go-to man on Ireland, have been for me for many, many years. Bring us up to date with what's happening in the north of the country, where politics appears to be up a gum tree.
Well, I mean, we've had an opinion poll a few weeks ago, which has caused a not insignificant amount of consternation between the unionist parties, which shows that the Democratic Unionists, which are the largest of the unionist parties, people often think there's just one, but there are in fact 3 or 4 that reflect different strands of opinion. That the DUP, which currently holds a position of First Minister and has been dominant for the last 15 years or so, is starting to really struggle. And partly that's a result of the impact of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is the agreement that Boris Johnson agreed to as part of his Brexit withdrawal agreement, which ensures that there is no hard border on the island of Ireland, which is replete with all kinds of significance in terms of the troubles and the period before, razor wire and watchtowers and all the rest of it. We don't want that to go back to that. But it requires, because Britain is obviously leaving the European Union, has a land border with the Republic of Ireland, it requires border checks happen somewhere. And the government are lighted on having them take place at the ports. This is the Northern Ireland Protocol. Unionists and loyalists, the more militant version of unionists, are up in arms about this, to put it mildly. They see Northern Ireland being treated differently than the rest of the UK, that there is a physical division in terms of the checks on goods and coming into Northern Ireland. They're very irate about it. There's been lots of protests over the summer by loyalists, which have involved some fairly sinister protests, petrol bombs, ripping up copies of the Good Friday Agreement, lots of graffiti on walls, and all the rest of it. And the DUP is suffering the fallout from this. They are held accountable by loyalists from whom they draw a lot of their electoral support because they trusted Boris Johnson, basically, that he wouldn't institute a hard border at the borders, which is exactly what he's done. The DUP are reaping a whirlwind from this. They've seen their electoral support half in opinion polls. They've got support drifting both ways. So the Ulster Unionist Party, which is a slightly more liberal version of the DUP, they're gaining support off the back of the DUP's difficulties, and traditional Ulster voice, traditional Unionist voice rather, which is a Paisleyite sect and has been regarded as kind of beyond the fringe really. It's also drawing support away from the DUP. So in effect, you've got the Unionist vote splintering three different ways, which has the effect of making Sinn Féin in opinion polls the largest party by a considerable margin. Now, we've got elections to the Northern Ireland Assembly that are due to take place next May, which would see potentially Sinn Féin top the poll and therefore take the role of First Minister of Northern Ireland. Now, it doesn't matter in some regards because First Minister, Deputy First Minister are a joint office. It's a way to make sure from the time of the Good Friday Agreement that you couldn't have unionist majority control, which is, of course, is the problem that led to the Troubles in the first place in the 1960s. So the joint offices, but it's that sort of pecking order that changes, where Sinn Féin are kind of top of the pops. Now, unionists find this, a real kind of signifier of their long-term decline. So you're getting all kinds of noises off from the fringe saying, well, we don't want that, we want pacts. The Ulster Unionist Party yesterday said that they weren't going to agree on a pact with the Democratic Unionists. There's talk of, well, we'll crash the institutions. Jeffrey Donaldson, the new leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, has talked about if there aren't major reforms to the Northern Ireland Protocol by Christmas, that he will crash the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement and power sharing, which of course would be massively destabilising and massively significant. Because he thinks he's drifting towards a major reckoning with the electorate in May anyway. Now, the British government's trying to make effectively some cosmetic changes to the protocol. There's no arguments about the protocol staying. Some unionists, some loyalists are up in arms saying they want the protocol to be scrapped entirely. That's just not realistic. The British government recognises that's just not realistic. So what it's looking from the European Commission are a few cosmetic changes to some of the checks to make them slightly less onerous, so there's no delay in goods transferring across from Great Britain that are going to be used in Northern Ireland for a domestic market. So that's the kind of the nub of the deal. That's what the government's trying to get to try and prop up the DUP so that it doesn't face this kind of apocalyptic electoral reckoning in May, which may or may not happen. But of course, this all fits in the wider rubric of the future of Northern Ireland. This is the centenary year of Northern Ireland, and it's never looked, frankly, in worse shape than it does today. And on the other side of the equation, you've got nationalists and Republicans in Sinn Féin that are looking and thinking we've never been closer to the historic goal of Irish reunification, and that's very much on their agenda. And if these institutions are brought down by the Democratic Unionists, and if they don't want to play ball, and if they don't want to recognise that perhaps a Sinn Féin politician should be First Minister, if there's any of that kind of game playing, then I think the growing view amongst Sinn Féin and amongst constitutional nationalists as well is that actually, look, it's then a united Ireland or nothing. They want a border poll to put this issue out there because they've kind of had enough of some of the DUP's game playing. Because of course the DUP was a very strong supporter of Brexit on the basis, frankly, that they thought what Brexit would entail is that if it makes Northern Ireland less European, it also makes Northern Ireland less Irish. And I think what they hoped for was, frankly, that they would unfurl razor wire across the Irish border with watchtowers and barking Alsatians. And of course, that was never going to happen.
That ain't happening. We'll have to stay in touch with you about this because I think this will be the big story of 2022. Thanks very much indeed, Kevin Marr. In the second hour, I hope to strum and jam with Roger Waters. If you're watching or listening, we simply can't connect with you, Roger, so far. But there's much, much more to come. Stay tuned.
Radio Sputnik News.
Polls have closed in the German election that will decide who succeeds Chancellor Angela Merkel after 16 years in charge of Europe's biggest economy. Exit polls point to a very close race between Merkel's centre-right Union bloc with State Governor Armin Laschet running for Chancellor and the centre-left Social Democrats, for whom outgoing Finance Minister and Vice-Chancellor Olaf Scholz is seeking the top job. The Greens, with candidate Annalena Baerbock, are also making their first run for the Chancellery. About 60.4 million people in the nation of 83 million are eligible to elect the new Bundestag, or lower house of parliament, which will choose the next head of government. No party is expected to come anywhere near an outright majority. Britain's Transport Secretary has said there would be no fuel queues if motorists filled up as normal, as he accused a haulage group of triggering the so-called manufactured situation. Grant Shapps insisted there was, quote, plenty of fuel, and urged the public to be sensible, as some retailers were forced to shut their pumps and ration sales in the face of long lines at petrol stations for a third day. The supply crisis has been caused by a shortage of fuel tanker drivers. The Cabinet Minister's comments came as the government announced a temporary visa scheme that would allow 5,000 HGV drivers and 5,500 poultry workers to be brought in from abroad on 3-month contracts to keep supermarket shelves stocked with turkeys in the run-up to Christmas and tackle fuel delivery problems. However, business leaders have already warned the package of measures will not be enough. The Transport Secretary also rounded on a haulage trade body, which he said had helped spark the crisis through irresponsible briefings to the public, and claimed it was desperate to have more European drivers undercutting British salaries. Although Shapps did not name the group, it is reported that a government source claimed the Road Haulage Association was, quote, entirely responsible for this panic and chaos, end quote. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has not ruled out tax rises if Labour wins power, but he promised they would not, quote, unfairly hit working families as the party's conference opened in Brighton. He said, quote, we want those with the broadest shoulders to pay. But he said it was too far from an election to make firm tax commitments. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has also said she did not have, quote, any plans to increase the rates of income tax if Labour was to win the next election. Starmer accused Prime Minister Boris Johnson of whacking working people with a tax hike, with his plan to increase national insurance to pay for the NHS and social care. The Labour leader has also rode back on a commitment to nationalise the big 6 energy companies if he were to become Prime Minister, despite a pledge to support common ownership of the sector in his party leadership campaign last year. Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner has declined to apologise for calling the Conservatives scum, saying she was using street language to convey her anger and frustration at the actions of the government. She said the comments were made post-Watershed with a group of activists at an event last night at the party's annual conference in Brighton. She said she was trying to convey in a passionate way the anger and frustration that people feel when you have a Prime Minister who has said things and not apologised that are racist, that are misogynistic, that are homophobic, that has given billions of pounds of taxpayers' money to their mates and literally wasted that money, end quote. According to the Daily Mirror, she told the event on Saturday night, quote, we cannot get any worse than a bunch of scum, homophobic, racist, misogynistic, absolute vile, banana republic, vile, nasty, Etonian piece of scum, end quote. A father of 2 who has spent 4 years looking for a stem cell donor after he was diagnosed with blood cancer said he had not, quote, felt this alive for years after completing a charity wing walk. Peter McCleve was diagnosed with myeloma in 2017 and was told that he has 7 years to find a match for a life-saving stem cell donation. However, after a 4-year global search, the 43-year-old from Cheshire is yet to find one. He completed the stunt walk with Sally Herman, aged 50, and Lisa Jackson, 51, at Damon's Hall Aerodrome in Essex yesterday to support DKMS, an international blood cancer charity. McCleve said, quote, I haven't felt this alive for years. It's been an absolutely exhilarating and fantastic thing to do, he said. And finally, it's not often that you find a country's leader on the soccer pitch, and it's even rarer as a professional, and it's almost impossible if you're 60. But Suriname's Vice President Ronnie Brunswick took time out of his vice presidential duties to captain the club that he owns, Inter Mongatapo. a second-tier international club competition akin to UEFA's Europa League. Inter eventually lost 6-0 against Honduran side CD Olimpia on Tuesday, according to an official match report. Brunswick said he, quote, made history by becoming the oldest player at 60 years of age to play in an international club competition, end quote, according to the network ESPN. But that appearance has led to trouble, or rather what allegedly happened after the game. In a video shared on social media, Brunswick appears to be handing out cash bills to people in the CD Olimpia changing room before leaving with a shirt of the Honduran club. He is now being investigated by the Football Authority. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, it's my duty to inform you that rumours that Angela Rayner did not have a leadership election campaign team in place are clearly unfounded. In the last 5 minutes, our poll has transformed utterly. Who will be the next Labour Prime Minister? A. Angela Rayner, 53%, up 48%. B. Poor Andy Burnham, left, trailing in the Donkey Derby, 15%, down 16%. C. Not born yet, 32%, down 32%. 2,800 people have now voted. Angela Rayner has run up a huge phone bill, almost as big as the money she charged the public for her iPods, and almost as expensive as the fancy shoes that she spent £1,000 on buying because she's working class, if you know what I mean. Now, China is on their mind, always. The problem is we never hear from China. Nobody tells us how it looks from the standpoint of China. To see the South China Sea chock-a-block with foreign gunboats, to see the high officials of respectable companies like Huawei being arrested and held under house arrest for years. We never hear the Chinese point of view, so we thought we'd go at least halfway there. Tom McGregor is married to a Chinese woman, has half Chinese children, lives and works and has a wonderful life in China, but he's American. How's that for a compromise? It's the middle of the night, but Tom McGregor joins us from Beijing. Tom, thank you for that. A serious point, though. How does it feel in China when all around you in quadraphonic sound are messages of scorn, even hatred, threats, and allegations and so on? Does that actually impact on Chinese lives at all?
No, not at all. The reality of China is they're very accustomed to being the villain among many Westerners, among many countries around the world. They've been villainized for so long that they've just gotten used to it, and it's just a normal situation for them. The fact is you have all this rumbling and mumbling from all these Western governments saying how terrible China is, and has China changed? No. Have the Chinese people changed? No. So what's going on? Why is all this continuing? Well, the West simply just does not understand China. They think that if they do some criticisms, they threaten to do economic sanctions, they do any way to look China bad, that somehow China is going to cower and look weak and suddenly turn and change its government just to please the people who criticize them. No, that's not the Chinese way. Face issues are very important in China. So if they feel they are being bullied, they bully back. That's just the way it is here. What I mainly do is, yes, I do live here. I'm very happy here. But I try to tell people what the real China is, not as if I'm pro-China or I'm a Chinese person. I'm just trying to let people know that what they are doing in response to China is not working.
Well, not working, to say the least. China now has a leader who I think by most tests is the strongest leader that they've had since Mao Zedong. He has taken the country on a slightly adjusted course, a bit more socialism, a bit less capitalism, a bit less tolerance for the frolics of the billionaires, even trillionaires. There are many of the many billionaires in China, of course. Not a fundamental change in the mixed economy, but if you like, a slight change of direction. And his position must be strengthened, not weakened, by open calls for regime change in semi-official Australian newspapers and in other august publications. They want rid of the Chinese president. That's going to make the Chinese even less likely to change course, isn't it?
Certainly not. Things like that certainly don't work in China, like they didn't work in Russia and their efforts to push out Putin in Russia. The Chinese respond in a similar manner. The more their leader is criticized and treated in a bad way, the more they love their leader. And they just conclude that it's sort of like us versus them mentality. So the West, and also the West doesn't even make it a secret they're trying to do this. They say, oh, we need rules-based governance. We need rules that China will follow. But then I've actually talked to Washington insiders. I said, well, who's making the rules? Who's deciding the rules? Well, it's Washington. So how do you expect China to follow that if Washington is making itself the rules-based referee, the judge, jury, and executioner? It just doesn't work that way in China. And then you ask a lot of these people who are insiders or for whatever reason, they feel they don't need to compromise with China. They don't need to do anything about changing their positions. They're going to be strongly anti-China. Yet they struggle to understand that maybe the Chinese don't like that. They're not appreciative of their efforts to do regime change, to inform the Chinese how they need to live their lives and govern themselves.
How does the West get it so wrong? And it's everywhere. It's in the media, it's in the political class. The Chinese ambassador, believe it or not, was banned from the British Parliament just the other day. The Canadian Huawei case. Why do they get it so wrong? Because as you pointed out at the beginning of this discussion, when you ask these critics, what has China actually done that has encouraged this wrath, this hatred, this aggression? Australia being a case in point. What did China ever do to Australia? And yet Australia is now one of the most warlike and belligerent flies ever to be found buzzing around an elephant.
Australia is a police state right now. Have you seen the videos?
Yeah.
You're not vaccinated, they put a gun to your head nowadays. Have you seen the videos on the streets? They put some woman in a chokehold just because she didn't wear a face mask in Melbourne, Australia. I don't know when the date was, but it's become a
cross between Mad Max and 1984.
Yeah, exactly. So what's Australia to say about freedoms and allowing people to speak freely? They can't even protest anymore in Australia without the police state gunning them down, beating the citizens up. I don't even see that in China. I mean, of course, they're not protesting, but there is a police state in Australia right now. So they're the last people to talk about and criticize China over its so-called authoritarian regime. And another matter I'd like to address is why doesn't the West get it? It sounds arrogant, but people need to talk to me. People need to talk to people like me who live in China, who work in China, who can explain China to the elites. I think what's going on is you have these elites who live in a bubble. They have these so-called ideas about China, and it will never change. And they do their articles in the media, or they are politicians giving speeches about anti-China. But so, every once in a while, I will meet some of these people, and I will ask them, where's your proof? Where's your evidence? They don't have it. They just are using talking points, anti-China talking points they've used their entire lives.
Now, Joe Biden hasn't changed course. Donald Trump was literally unhinged on the subject of China and was surrounded by others like Steve Bannon, who, although we now know, was in quite a close alliance with anti-Chinese interests. Trump was unhinged, but Biden is following exactly the same course. AUKUS, this Australian-UK US lash-up, is going to bring nuclear submarines into the region, as if it hadn't suffered from nuclear quite enough. He's having this Quad meeting with India, Japan, and so on, basically constructing alliances to confront China. So it's a bipartisan approach in Washington. Why?
Well, that's always been the case. When I talked to the Washington Insider recently, I was also a bit surprised Biden is continuing on with the anti-China. And the Washington Insider said the Democrats are just as bad about anti-China as the Republicans are, just in a different way. So for the Republicans, it's about trade deals. It's about military issues. For the Democrats, it's solely about human rights. So they're actually, to be honest, the Democrats are even worse than the Republicans, because at least the Republicans are willing to negotiate. You may believe that Trump was unhinged. I agree. Bannon and Pompeo were disastrous on China policy. But Trump was looking for a better trade deal, and he was open to negotiations. And they were headed in that direction until Trump, and from my opinion, lost, unfortunately. And so Biden is just trying the same old of anti-China stuff. He's crashing in poll numbers. His numbers are so bad that from what poll numbers are saying, that if Trump was to run against Biden this year or anytime soon, he would totally trash Biden's chances of winning re-election. So Biden basically is just following a script, thinking that the anti-China way is going to somehow rescue his political fortunes, when in reality, it's actually making it much worse. Because by pursuing this type of tensions, you're going to create more problems on the global supply chains. China is not going to be so cooperative on economic cooperation deals with the West anymore if they tend to push back. The West also, they really care much about this climate change conference that's coming up in November. But are we really sure Xi Jinping is going to show up and sign on if the West continues to criticize China the way it's doing right now? I mean, I heard she may go, but you don't know. Maybe they might change their mind, realizing they're not going to get any benefits from it.
Well, they might change their mind on something even more important. China has always had a no first use of nuclear weapon policy, unlike the United States, unlike Britain, unlike NATO. China has, as a matter, an article of faith, always said it will not be the first to use nuclear weapons in any conflict. But there is growing speculation amongst informed people in Beijing that this may be coming under question. After all, if the West are moving military hardware around China.
That's too much. That's just crazy speculation. The fact is China, if they were to move in that direction, they probably wouldn't tell anyone and start shooting. But when we reach that stage, it's already a bad stage already. Beforehand, there's just simply talks. Making such threats actually is rather scary. If some people are saying it, like say maybe perhaps the Global Times is not representative of the Chinese government nor the voice of the government or its people. The Global Times is a very extreme version of Chinese patriotism that even many Chinese complain goes too far. So this idea that China is going to change that policy is way too drastic. I can see how China might try to get some bargaining on climate change, but what you just addressed, that's too much. That might create more problems. That might inspire South Korea and Japan to have their own nuclear weapons. It's too risky.
Finally, and thanks for joining us, especially at this early hour. How has the Chinese economy bounced back from the COVID years, these lotus years?
Doing absolutely fine. I'm doing better financially. Myself, my family is. Most people I know are doing better financially. There are no supply chain disruptions in China because it's the #1 manufacturer in the world. It's interesting that I hear all these stories about supply chain disruptions all over the world, while at the same time, they're trying to decouple from China economically. So the reality is China has been prepared for the possibility there's going to be more decoupling, that more countries are going to turn against them, even in regards to globalism. So China has just turned inward. It's selling its goods to the Chinese, focusing on selling to Chinese consumers rather than the world's consumers. And so here the economy is doing quite well.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom McGregor, for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. In 1908, Henry Ford's first Ford Model T car left the Piquet plant in Detroit, Michigan. What was it nicknamed? A, Tin Lizzie, B, Old Faithful, C, Battling Bertha. That's a hard one. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
The first Model T was Tin Lizzie. Now, this extraordinary poll is breaking all records. It's already a record number of respondents. Angela Rayner will be the next Labour PM, according to 52% of you. That's down 1, but my goodness. What a transformation from 5. Burnham, 15%. No change, it says there. No chance, it might have said. And C, not born yet, 33%, up 1. So you can still vote until the hour on my Telegram, my YouTube, and my Twitter. It's interesting that on my Telegram, only 8% think Angela Rayner is the next leader. On my YouTube, only 12% think Angela Rayner is the next leader. But on my Twitter, 52% of thousands of votes think Angela Rayner is the next Labour Prime Minister. I guess they only went skin deep. Now I can tell you that it's being reported that Sir Keir Starmer's package of leadership reforms has been approved by Labour members, laughably described, following a tight vote, 53.6 to 46.4. I say laughably because, of course, this was only achieved by the block vote of the once reviled trade unions, particularly Unison and some others, who have ramrodded this package of reforms, which means nobody can ever challenge Keir Starmer unless he decides to go. And if he does, the only someone with twice as many nominations from MPs as Keir Starmer had to achieve will be able to be on the ballot paper. Still for staying and fighting, I ask Labour members, the game's a bogey. It's over. It's time to walk. Now, as we know, because we've covered it regularly, both here and on my TV show Sputnik, the killer of poor Harry Dunn was an American intelligence operator called Anne Sekulas. She drove out of what is laughably described as an RAF base, but is in fact a nest of American spies, drove up the road on the wrong side of the road and killed poor Harry, and then fled the country, falsely claiming diplomatic immunity. And although the United States is mad keen on the extradition of Julian Assange, and some of them are even mad keen on the extradition of Prince Andrew, they have steadfastly refused any political or legal move to force Anne Sekulas to come back to Britain to face the music. One man, more than any other, has been the indefatigable spokesman for the family of poor Harry. He's Radd Seiger, and he joins us now. Radd, thank you. This could be the last time that we talk, because you've reached a settlement with the US or with Sekulas. I don't know which. Maybe you can tell us. Is that the end? No justice for Harry, but at least a settlement for his suffering family.
George, very good evening to you. It's good to be with you as always. So just to remind your viewers and listeners, there are two separate legal cases ongoing, and they are distinct and separate from each other. So the first one is the civil case, which Harry's parents have brought against Mrs. Sekulas personally for civil damages in the United States, what you and I might call a personal injury case. That is the case that was resolved this week. I cannot go any further than that word, resolved. But that case has absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with the separate criminal case, which the Crown Prosecution Service here in the UK remain intent on bringing against Mrs. Sekulas. And we are very confident this evening that that is exactly what is going to happen. So the resolution of the civil case has absolutely nothing to do with the ongoing criminal case against her.
Now, the DPP has tried but failed so far. Why do you say this evening there's a better chance that they might now succeed?
We knew instinctively, George, when President Biden came into power in January, that he was going to reverse President Trump's decision. He's spoken frequently about the fact that nobody is above the law, that human rights are important, and we knew he had been through a similar tragedy himself. And sure enough, George, over the following weeks and months, we began to hear from officials in the FCDO that the decision was going to be reversed. And you'll remember, George, on the eve of G7 and on the first day of G7, Harry Dunn dominated the agenda because Boris announced to the world that the path to justice had been cleared by President Biden. And so ever since early June, we've simply been waiting to hear from the Crown Prosecution Service, whose case, it's in their hands, as to when and how that prosecution is going to be brought. So for us, it's no longer a question of if, but how and when. And obviously, George, you'll appreciate this. I have almost daily contact with officials both in London and Washington. And I wouldn't have the temerity to come onto your wonderful show tonight and mislead the audience. There's no doubt in our mind that is what is now going to happen.
What are the various forms, Radd, in which it could happen? One is obviously her returning to face a British court. Are there any other more creative forms? Could this case somehow be heard in the United States, or like the Lockerbie case held at The Hague? I mean, what are the different options?
Well, look, let me answer that in two respects. And you'll know I'm a lawyer, but I'm also a family friend of Harry's. The parents are 200 yards up the road this evening. So let me, from a legal perspective, George, I believe that they are looking at alternative ways of bringing this prosecution. We've all heard talk in the past about there being a remote process, as you've described. I believe that might be a legal first if it were to happen. But what I've counseled the family over the last few weeks on is, look, we are victims, or the family are victims of a very serious crime. What we must do now, we are not the prosecutors. We must now take a step back from the process. We know the path to justice is clear, and let's let the Crown Prosecution Service do their work without pressure from me or the British government or the great British public, and they will undoubtedly make their announcement in due course. So I can't answer your question this evening because I don't know what is being planned, but all I can tell you is that they remain absolutely intent on prosecuting the right person for the right offense. Now, look, the Americans have made it clear that she's not going to be physically extradited. But look, I simply think now that the path to justice has been cleared, let's wait for the CPS to make their announcement, which we hope will be coming very soon.
Very soon, we hope so. What are you going to do when this is all over, Radd? You've fought this campaign so magnificently. Just as a family friend, you fought it. Nobody hired you. You're not a professional at these things. What's going to happen for Radd Seiger when this is over?
George, it's so kind of you to think of me, and thank you for that. As you can imagine, this has taken a huge toll on my life, my family's life, but I don't really think about myself because 200 yards up the road, there's a family whose lives have been utterly destroyed, not only through the loss of their beautiful son, but the way the U.S. government have treated them. So what we have a saying on Team Harry, which is we just live in the moment. We take it hour by hour. Look, George, I don't mind telling you that over the coming weeks and months when this is done, I'm going to have to take myself away and have a bit of a rest because it isn't easy taking on the United States government. They had a plan. Their playbook was to sweep this family under the carpet and for you all to have never heard of them. And it's taken every ounce of my energy and strength to wrap my arms around them and say, no, you do not get to kill one of my friends and walk away. But thank you for thinking of me. I'll continue to put the family's interests first, and then I'll look after myself once they're sorted out.
Luckily, there's more than a few ounces of your courage and strength. Radd Seiger, thanks for joining us, as always, on the mother of all talk shows. Let me do some social media. Bushman says, the usual identity politics from the Labour Party, they will never win back the red wall seats. Wayne says, shame someone like George couldn't be the PM. That's why we're doomed. And Hertfordshire 247 says, I think for Tories and Labour, we're all homeless, which could be dangerous. I agree when Boris was described as a red Tory. In fact, Labour and the Tory party, as I described earlier, are two cheeks of the same backside. It's Blairite Labour versus Blairite Conservative. When I hear people like Angela Rayner talk about today's Tory government as if they were Attila the Hun, you'd actually have to be really young or really stupid to believe that this is the most racist, misogynistic, working class hating government Britain has ever had. I lived through the Thatcher era when Britain was shredded to pieces, when the labour movement was decimated, when industries were closed down, when the brute force of the ugly face of British capitalism and British imperialism abroad were brought to bear. This lot are Sunday school teachers compared to Keith Joseph, Norman Tebbit, Margaret Thatcher. You're either too young to know that or you're too stupid to have noticed it. Today's Conservative government are a gaggle of cocaine-sniffing party boys and girls. They're not homophobic. Half of them are gay. The others are frolicking alongside gay people. They're not racist. The Tory party government has got more people of colour in it than any Labour government has ever had anywhere. They are liberals. We've got a liberal Tory party and a liberal Labour party. That's why they've got to pretend that they really hate each other and call each other scum. Now, one man who is at the Labour conference used to be a legend round here. It's Damien in Brighton. Go ahead, Damien.
Good evening, George.
Evening. How's it going?
Very well, thank you. Very well indeed. George, I'd like to discuss Keir Starmer's position, please.
Yeah.
I believe it's impossible for Labour to win power while Keir Starmer is the leader of the party. And the reason I believe that is can be summed up in one sentence, really. Starmer tried to stop Brexit.
Yeah.
He tried to cheat 17.4 million Leave voters out of their referendum victory, which was a gross offence against British democracy. He then betrayed the 16.1 million voters who voted to remain by voting for the Tories' terrible Brexit deal. Then if we dig into the numbers a little bit deeper, 70%, bearing in mind his strategy is to shift Labour right to appease to soft Tories, 70% of Tory constituencies voted Leave. It's just not plausible, George, that to suggest that they would vote, those constituencies would vote for the person who tried to stop Brexit and whose support base is made up largely of Remainers who want to rejoin the EU.
Good point. I agree with all of that, Damien, but here are some facts.
Yes.
You tried very hard, admirably hard. I didn't have a dog in the fight, but you tried very hard to stop the General Secretary being confirmed. He's been confirmed. You tried very hard to stop these new leadership election rules, which just in the last hour we've learned have passed. So the game's over, isn't it?
Okay, so yes, David Evans has been appointed. It was the first, it's worth noting that was the first card vote ever held to ratify the appointment of a Labour General Secretary in the history of the party. And David Evans won 2% of the party did not want him to be appointed. So it's hardly a ringing endorsement, George. And also
makes no difference. He's in position.
True. But it is worth noting also that the Labour conference this year at Brighton has been the most gerrymandered conference, also the most gerrymandered
also
conference
true.
in the history of the party.
Also true, but that also makes no difference.
No, true. But I'm talking about electability, George.
Yeah, no, I agree. So let's summarise the position. Keir Starmer is a disaster but cannot be removed. You would now need double the number of MPs to nominate someone else in his stead, which makes it virtually impossible. His General Secretary is in power. The purge will now be completed. So what does all that add up to? A walking disaster electorally is now impregnable in his position as leader.
Yeah, I mean, clearly the model, the template that Keir Starmer and David Evans are following is the Democratic Party in the US, where you do not have members. You have people who register to vote in primaries. And the party is funded by corporations and rich individuals, and that, you know, I mean, obviously, you know, the basic purpose of the exercise is, as Tony Benn said, to make capitalism safe. But if I could just develop my point just a little bit more, George, if you'd allow me to.
Sure.
So the rebuttal to my argument about the opportunistic positioning of Keir Starmer, which to any...
Go on.
Yep.
I lost that last sentence. Give me that one again.
Yep, sure. So the rebuttal to my argument that Brexit, the Remainers will all say, you know, oh, everyone's going to have forgotten about Brexit by the next general election. But it's a bigger issue. It's a matter of trust, because the Tories won't let people forget. And what they're going to do, I believe, at the next general election, the Tories will run on the issue of trust. And they will show a clip of Keir Starmer in 2017 saying that respecting the result was a matter of democracy and honour. And then next to that clip, they'll show a clip of him in 2018 refusing to accept the result. Now, as government is a matter of trust, Brexit has proved that Starmer's word is not his bond. Any manifesto he writes will not be worth the paper it's written on. And Labour will lose the next general election on that basis. So I think whilst it's basically what I'm saying, George, is that it's a hollow victory. There is a path to power for Labour at the next general election, even though it might be held as soon as, you know, within 24 months. And that path to power would be for the party to replace Keir Starmer with a leader. If Labour wants to win the next general election, it needs to replace Keir Starmer with a person whose word is their bond and who isn't closely associated with trying to overturn the largest democratic mandate in the history of British democracy, and to readopt a similar platform to the 2017 platform that won 40% of the vote and brought Jeremy Corbyn within 2,227 votes of being invited by the Queen to form a Labour government.
Who might that person be? Give us a clue.
Well, I'm quite positive about this. I mean, the whole point is that, you know, Keir Starmer's the best the right wing's got, which isn't saying much because he's as wooden as a spoon and really doesn't. It would be like, well, to answer your question, I'm not going to enter into ad hominem attacks. To answer your question, on the left of the party, and I know it's a very small grouping, but we've got some great candidates that would make a great leadership team, a fresh, vibrant team. We've got Zava Sultana, we've got Richard Bergen, we've got Dawn Butler, we've got Ian Lavery, we've got Barry Gardner, we've got we could get a very strong leader and deputy.
But they would now need to get double the number of nominations, which they can't get.
Let's let the polling. Starmer's polling's dropping like a stone. Labour is, back to my original point, that
you're not serious that 80 Labour MPs would nominate Zara Sultana.
What I'm saying, George, is that as reality sinks into the Labour Party, and we've seen from recent election results that Starmer is electorally toxic for the Labour Party, he's not just unelectable, he's toxic, we will find out which Labour MPs want to keep their seats and which are happy to lose them. And as the pressure comes on from the polling, I think you might find that there would be Labour MPs who put their own self-interest first and are willing to lend their nomination to a candidate on the left. Because what we've seen clearly from election results this century, and it's worth bearing in mind that Corbyn, a socialist leader with a left-wing manifesto, won more seats and gained more seats, won more votes and gained more seats than any other Labour leader this century. What we have seen
are there any defeats that will persuade you that actually you're flogging a dead horse, Damien?
Just the final point was on Labour loses millions of votes when it shifts right and gains millions when it shifts left. To answer your question, George, the best possible outcome, if Starmer stays in post, the best possible outcome I can see is that because of people becoming fatigued with the Tories, similar as they did in 1997, because of the lack of trust in the Labour Party, because people vote for it when it's left wing and drop off when it's right wing. I think there's going to be a collapse in the turnout at the next election, and if I just want to see as many socialists returned as possible, and I'm looking across at America where you have 10 progressives in the Democrats who, if they wanted, who do hold the balance of power but choose not to use it. I think the best outcome, if Starmer stays, is that if we get as many socialist MPs into Parliament, be they in the Labour Party, be they in any other party, that form a bloc that acts as a voting bloc of between 40 to 50 socialist MPs, then it is very possible that socialist MPs could hold the balance of power in the next Parliament.
Okay, good luck finding them. Thanks, Damien. Welcome back. Good to hear your voice again. Now, in this week, in 1987, Pope John Paul died. How long had he been Pope? A, 20 years, B, 18 months, C, 33 days. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Here? Where am I?
Welcome to St. Peter's Gate, my son.
Is this one of that Hillary's tricks, that devil?
Be still, my son. The Clintons cannot hurt you here. You are safe with me in heaven.
Oh, heck. Knew I shouldn't have taken Bob's homemade vaccine. Oh, Lord have mercy, I am not worthy.
Before you pass on, you may ask any question you desire.
Anything?
With my omniscient knowledge, I can tell you anything you wish to know.
Well, Lord, you gotta tell me. All-powerful creator of this universe, before you judge me, I've been searching for answers my whole life.
Yes, my child.
I have to know. Who shot JFK?
Another one. It was a lone gunman by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. He was not a government agent, and there was no second shooter on that grassy knoll in Dallas.
My God! This goes higher up than we thought!
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Poor John Paul was Pope for only 33 days, the shortest ever papacy. So, I've got so much social media, let me try and get through some of it. Dear George, can't you just swallow your pride? Go with the flow and call yourself Georgina? Labour's next Prime Minister in waiting. Best, Tony Getliff. Thank you, Tony. Now, it's interesting that you say that, because I read Famous Five books to my small children. They absolutely love them, politically incorrect as they are. They love them because it's redolent of another time. It's redolent of things that they don't know, that have never actually been seen in Britain for a very, very long time. I won't go into those at the moment. I'm being screamed at in my ear because I know that Enid Blyton is very unpopular, but not in my house. So in the famous five, there is a girl called Georgina who absolutely refuses to be called a girl and absolutely refuses to be called Georgina. She insists that her name is George, that she's not just as good as any boy, climbing trees, climbing mountains, fighting off intruders, all the things that happen on their adventures. Not only is she as good as any boy, she is a boy. And I was thinking the other night, this was surely one of the earliest examples of self-ID in British literature. And from the pen of Enid Blyton, who is traduced by every liberal and progressive as a thoroughgoing reactionary. Discuss. Let's hear from Kenzie in Glasgow. Go ahead, Kenzie.
All right, George, mate.
All right, sir.
How are you doing, mate?
I'm doing fine, as you can hear.
That's fine. That's good, mate. Thanks for having me on, big man.
Welcome.
I was calling because, see, earlier you said about the independence rallies and that.
Yeah.
And how they were less popular.
Without a doubt, you can't dispute that.
Do you not think that's because of COVID? But
no, there was 50,000 people at a concert in Glasgow at the weekend. Last weekend.
People
there was 15,000 people at Dens Park, but there was only 200 in Dundee at the Indy rally. So COVID has nothing to do with that. If people wanted to come out, they would have, as they did for the concert, as they're doing every week for the football matches. That's a pretty lame alibi, that one, Kenzie.
no, I get what you're saying, but I think it's different types of people, right? Because, like, people who support Scottish independence, most of them are normal people who, when they say, oh, mate, Momo go down their march, by the way. That's no sort of actual people who, like, David or spare time, as you're saying. People break here, Momo go to
so
the
it's not normal people that are going to the football matches or the 50,000 at the concert?
That's normal people. I wasn't saying that's what normal people want to do with their time. Like, everybody my age, I know would be like, Momo go to drinking or Momo go to football. Like, maybe saying Momo go to a march, do you know what I mean?
So
like,
you're saying the unnormal, I could call them abnormal, are those that would go on an independence march?
A wee bit, aye. It's kind of like the weirdos of society.
Well, when I look at them, I can never get over just how abnormal they look. Nobody in Scotland goes about in a kilt with a big beer belly with a saltire across it. Nobody in Scotland dresses up like these half-wits on these independence marches. So I agree with you, Kenzie. You thought you were disagreeing with me. They are utterly abnormal.
I agree, mate. That's my point, no. But most people who support independence are like old Labour voters who just think, here, see this Keir Starmer guy? Dafty. Right, because me and my girlfriend and my granda, we all like Jeremy Corbyn. Even my granny voted for him, right?
Right.
There you go. So, like, this Keir Starmer guy is the same as the rest of them, do you know what I mean? See, it's independence, I'm there, see, it's a thing. I'm not saying, because Nicola Sturgeon was my MSP, I stayed in Govan Hill, right? And I know how bad Govan Hill is, I'm not stupid, she doesn't care about Scotland, to be honest with you. But I'm there just thinking the point, Momo get away for, like, because all the English people, all the working class English people went doing that EDL stuff. Do you know what I mean? As if it is you're saying, that's like the equivalent of people cutting about in like kilts. But the difference is, the more the people cutting about in kilts are like more middle class punters up here. Is down there, it's like all the mad working class people.
No, Kenzie, you could not be more wrong. But I'm grateful for your time on the phone and the way you argued your point. But the EDL could not fill this studio. The EDL represent a scintilla of a percentage of English people. Nothing could be further from the truth. English people in my opinion, I've lived amongst them for many decades, are the salt of the earth. They are the best people that I have ever lived amongst. They're the best people I have ever known, and I include my own people, the Scottish people, in that equation. If you think English people are racist, you've never lived in France, or in Denmark, or in the Netherlands, or in Germany. It is a calumny against the English people to compare them to the EDL. I've got to go to the Bahamas. You would too, Kenzie, if you were me. I'm going from Glasgow to Mike in the Bahamas. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, George, how are you?
I'm good. Nice to hear from you. Go on.
Yeah, I just got back from 2.5 weeks vacation in the UK, but I'm calling up about how come you haven't reported the results of the Maricopa County recount or the Arizona recount?
I was waiting for you to do it for me.
Trump is even a bigger loser than was originally thought.
Please tell us, educate us. The results of the Maricopa County are not high on my agenda.
But you did mention it. You mentioned that Cyber Ninjas a few weeks ago. Now, I don't think Cyber Ninjas is a reputable company. They have their headquarters is a P.O. box in Sarasota. Cyber Ninjas is the company that did the recount. Their headquarters is a P.O. box in Sarasota, Florida. That alone should tell you something. But really, you should have mentioned it. I don't think.
Tell me, I'm waiting for you to mention it. I'm waiting for you to tell us.
Well, I just did. Come on.
Tell us. So what was the outcome? What was the outcome? We're all waiting with bated breath.
I can't remember the exact numbers, but by a few thousand votes, Biden was ahead.
Okay. So
your
point is that Biden was duly elected after all?
Well, yeah, there was no reason for this audit. They had already done 2 before. How many audits are we going to have?
You're talking to me as if I'm in the Donald Trump camp. What are you talking about, man?
Well, I mean, you do attack Biden quite a bit. You mentioned how old and senile he is.
Are you here to deny it? Are you, Mike, in the Bahamas?
Let me say this.
Are you here to deny that Joe Biden is old and senile?
He's past his sell-by date, but so is Trump. At least Biden didn't wear his trousers on backwards. Come on.
I'm not so sure.
Trump is no bastion of sanity either. I think they both should be replaced.
I watched your president make as if to walk off a pier and into the waves at the G7 summit on the south coast of England. I saw his wife run after him, catch him, turn him round the right way. And as for trousers, he walks as if he's wearing.
Trump is senile as well.
You're going to think he walks as if he isn't wearing any trousers. He prances in order to disguise just how old and senile he is. If you are here to say, Mike, that Tweedledee and Tweedledum in the United States that you had to choose from are both unworthy of the great people of the United States, I'm in full agreement with you. I didn't support either of them.
He forced me to.
What?
I voted for Biden because everything that Trump came out with, I couldn't stand. Like the first in 2016, I voted for Jill Stein and the Greens, but then they had some joker.
I didn't have a vote, but I advocated for Dr. Jill Stein, and I don't regret a second of it. Me and Susan Sarandon, both of us were excoriated for it, but it was right. What a president she would have made. Okay, coming up, we've got Rachel Blevins on US politics. It doesn't look like we're going to get Roger Waters this week, but we are going to get him next week. So stay tuned. There's still lots more to come on the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik News.
Polls have closed in the German election that will decide who succeeds Chancellor Angela Merkel after 16 years in charge of Europe's biggest economy. Exit polls point to a very close race between Merkel's centre-right Union bloc with State Governor Armin Laschet running for Chancellor and the centre-left Social Democrats, for whom outgoing Finance Minister and Vice-Chancellor Olaf Scholz is seeking the top job. The Greens, with candidate Annalena Baerbock, are also making their first run for the Chancellery. About 60.4 million people in the nation of 83 million are eligible to elect the new Bundestag, or lower house of parliament, which will choose the next head of government. No party is expected to come anywhere near an outright majority. Britain's Transport Secretary has said there would be no fuel queues if motorists filled up as normal, as he accused a haulage group of triggering the so-called manufactured situation. Grant Shapps insisted there was, quote, plenty of fuel, and urged the public to be sensible, as some retailers were forced to shut their pumps and ration sales in the face of long lines at petrol stations for a third day. The supply crisis has been caused by a shortage of fuel tanker drivers. The Cabinet Minister's comment came as the government announced a temporary visa scheme that would allow 5,000 HGV drivers and 5,500 poultry workers to be brought in from abroad on 3-month contracts to keep supermarket shelves stocked with turkeys in the run-up to Christmas and tackle fuel delivery problems. However, business leaders have already warned the package of measures will not be enough. The Transport Secretary also rounded on a haulage trade body, which he said had helped spark the crisis through irresponsible briefings to the public, and claimed it was desperate to have more European drivers undercutting British salaries. Although Shapps did not name the group, it is reported that a government source claimed the Road Haulage Association was, quote, entirely responsible for this panic and chaos, end quote. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has not ruled out tax rises if Labour wins power, but he promised they would not, quote, unfairly hit working families as the party's conference opened in Brighton. He said, quote, we want those with the broadest shoulders to pay. But he said it was too far from an election to make firm tax commitments. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has also said she did not have, quote, any plans to increase the rates of income tax if Labour was to win the next election. Starmer accused Prime Minister Boris Johnson of whacking working people with a tax hike, with his plan to increase national insurance to pay for the NHS and social care. The Labour leader has also rode back on a commitment to nationalise the big 6 energy companies if he were to become Prime Minister, despite a pledge to support common ownership of the sector in his party leadership campaign last year. Labour's deputy leader Angela Rayner has declined to apologise for calling the Conservatives scum, saying she was using street language to convey her anger and frustration at the actions of the government. She said the comments were made post-Watershed with a group of activists at an event last night at the party's annual conference in Brighton. She said she was trying to convey in a passionate way the anger and frustration that people feel when you have a Prime Minister who has said things and not apologised that are racist, that are misogynistic, that are homophobic, that has given billions of pounds of taxpayers' money to their mates and literally wasted that money, end quote. According to the Daily Mirror, she told the event on Saturday night, quote, we cannot get any worse than a bunch of scum, homophobic, racist, misogynistic, absolute vile, banana republic, vile, nasty, Etonian piece of scum, end quote. A father of 2 who has spent 4 years looking for a stem cell donor after he was diagnosed with blood cancer said he had not, quote, felt this alive for years after completing a charity wing walk. Peter McLeave was diagnosed with myeloma in 2017 and was told that he has 7 years to find a match for a life-saving stem cell donation. However, after a 4-year global search, the 43-year-old from Cheshire is yet to find one. He completed the stunt walk with Sally Herman, aged 50, and Lisa Jackson, 51, at Damon's Hall Aerodrome in Essex yesterday to support DKMS, an international blood cancer charity. McLeave said, quote, I haven't felt this alive for years. It's been an absolutely exhilarating and fantastic thing to do, he said. And finally, it's not often that you find a country's leader on the soccer pitch, and it's even rarer as a professional, and it's almost impossible if you're 60. But Suriname's Vice President Ronnie Brunswick took time out of his vice presidential duties to captain the club that he owns, Inter Mongatapo. a second-tier international club competition akin to UEFA's Europa League. Inter eventually lost 6-0 against Honduran side CD Olimpia on Tuesday, according to an official match report. Brunswick said he, quote, made history by becoming the oldest player at 60 years of age to play in an international club competition, end quote, according to the network ESPN. But that appearance has led to trouble, or rather what allegedly happened after the game. In a video shared on social media, Brunswick appears to be handing out cash bills to people in the CD Olimpia changing room before leaving with a shirt of the Honduran club. He is now being investigated by the Football Authority. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Well, I've got to tell you that in a remarkable development, Angela Rayner is going to be the next Labour Prime Minister, according to thousands of people who voted in our poll this evening. If you believe that, I've got a bridge here in London that I could sell you, going very cheap. Anyway, the second poll is now up. In the light of the US death threats and extraordinary rendition plans that I outlined earlier, in the light of the US death threats against Julian Assange, should he, in October, be extradited to the United States or released? It's a simple question. A, extradited. B, released. You can vote on my Twitter feed and on my YouTube and on my Telegram channel. Now, I'm very happy to say that we have Rachel Blevins on the line, my colleague from RT America and an adornment to the mother of all talk shows. Rachel, thanks for joining us on a busy night. Let me put to you something that was just put to me from the Bahamas. There was apparently a recount in Arizona, and Joe Biden won it even more than was announced at the time. Does this mark the end, do you think, of Donald Trump's obsessiveness on the last election, which if he doesn't shift onto the next election, he may very well lose his chance?
You know, it's interesting that we haven't gotten an announcement from him on the next election, rather. And exactly as you're saying, we continue to hear these statements from him. I don't think it's the end just quite yet, because in this specific case, when it comes to Arizona, there's an interesting report going around on social media, and it kind of has something for everyone. On one hand, it says, you know, Biden took away more votes than they even previously thought before. But then on the other hand, it also mentions that there are a few thousand irregularities in there, which is to say that there were some duplicated votes, or there were people who had voted when they shouldn't have voted, when they were actually voting in another state, that kind of thing. So when you have a report like that, even with a number of people saying, no, this isn't the case, or saying, hey, we shouldn't focus on those irregularities, well, Donald Trump and his party that is exactly what they're going to focus on. And that's kind of what we're seeing with them now. And I know that a number of his supporters are really taking things like this, even though it's something where it's not going to change the outcome of the election that we saw last year. That is something that they're still focusing on. Now, my question to them would be, what are you going to do to ensure that the next election isn't like that you take care of all of those irregularities? And that really should be something that Trump should really focus on, and kind of do that pivot to where he says, okay, we didn't like the way that it turned out the last time around. Now, what are we going to do moving forward? We haven't quite seen that just yet, but who knows? Time will tell.
He's still on the stump. I saw him giving a speech in which he swore, actually. I was quite surprised at that, given the Bible-belting base that he had extraordinarily. Have to wonder why anyone that carried around a Bible would be quite so affectionate about Donald Trump, who's a sinner if ever I saw one. But he's certainly still packing them in, isn't he?
He is, and you'd be surprised. I've met more than one person who believes that Trump was anointed by God. And so, yes, he still has that movement of people that follow him. And even what we've seen over the last year, it's really reinforced it, because the people who support Trump, they see him as someone who isn't just a political figure. They still see him as someone who is anti-establishment and who is taking on the establishment as if he's different than every other person who said that they were going to take on the establishment. And that's been fascinating and almost terrifying to watch, because in the 4 years that Trump was in office, he really didn't change that much, especially when it comes to U.S. foreign policy, especially when it comes to these hallmark things that Democrats and Republicans magically seem to agree on. He didn't make any meaningful, lasting changes in those areas. And yet you very much do still have a force of people that are following him as if he is some sort of chosen leader. And I think that we are going to continue to see that play out, especially as we're looking to the next election.
What did you think of the dress? I thought she looked quite nice in it, actually.
AOC's dress from last week, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of those, you got to wonder what they have whenever it comes to these public relations teams that each of these politicians have. Someone told her that that was a good idea. She claimed she didn't pay the $30,000 for the ticket. But I mean, this is the same politician, when we're talking about AOC, that whenever it came this week to the House of Representatives specifically passing funding for $1 billion in funding for Israel's Iron Dome, she voted present on it. And it's not like she had the deciding vote on it. I mean, I think the total was like 422-9. So it wasn't as if she would have made the deciding factor on that.
For British viewers and listeners, voting present is the equivalent of abstaining, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. I don't even know why they get that option, but they do. And she was one of the few Democrats to actually just vote present on it, and then came out with this long statement after it. And it serves as a reminder, at least it should, to every American, that this is the political elite you are dealing with. They come together whenever it comes to, like this week, we also saw them pass $778 billion for the National Defense Authorization Act. They're looking at increasing defense spending even more than in previous years, even more than what the Biden administration was asking for. And yet on the other token, they're saying, well, look at us, we're, ramping down on U.S. presence in the Middle East, but then they're coming together to pass that much in funding. I mean, that should make you wonder right there what they have planned if they're not spending it on the wars that they claim that they're bringing to an end.
Well, let's dwell on that subject, if you will. Israel is a rich country. It gives free healthcare to all its citizens. It gives free university and schooling to all of its citizens. It's a country that has many of the things that you don't have.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't it pay for its own Iron Dome? Why should American taxpayers, who don't have any of these things, be paying a country that does have all of these things?
Yeah, I wish you could ask that same question to all of the members of Congress who stand there and support it, because they really do turn it into almost a religion and saying that this is our ally and we need to support them. And yes, anyone in that political body who takes a step back and says, wait a second, why are we funding this when the United States itself has hundreds of thousands of people who are homeless on any given night, when we have children who are in schoolrooms that are absolutely falling apart, when we have people who are struggling to gain access to basic health care, when we as a country are not functioning in a way that we would even wish on our close ally Israel, it really does make you wonder, wait a second, why are we pouring so much money not only into their country, but also at the same time, why are we looking at increasing our defense budget and our defense spending even more? And what they do is they focus on these trigger words. They get up there and they say, oh, well, Israel's our ally, so that can't be questioned. Or they say, oh, well, China is upgrading their military. You know, they have a military, basically, is what they're actually saying. So the United States has to make sure to continue to spend more money on our military. Meanwhile, they're wasting trillions of dollars on building, you know, new planes and new jets, much like the F-35 program, I believe it was, that was just a colossal failure. And then they just kind of shrug their shoulders and they're like, oh, our bad, we wasted trillions on that.
Exactly. Now, the big story, isn't it, in the US at the moment, is the mandate from the president that all state federal employees have to be vaccinated. Is there any pushback against that?
You know, we have seen some pushback that's more on a state-by-state basis, which is you have states like Texas and like Florida that are passing all-out laws saying we will not do any kind of vaccine mandate here. And I think that that's really where we're going to kind of get the federal versus state control kind of debate going, because, of course, for the Biden administration's point, they can have a mandate that goes just towards federal employees. But now what they're seeing is pushback specifically from people like law enforcement, firefighters, groups of people who have made our society run. And now all of a sudden they're looking at possibly being out of a job in the next couple of weeks if they don't get the vaccine. And then on the other token, you have, you know, the Biden administration pushing possible booster shots. And I know for a lot of people that has created a lot of frustration, because you have millions of Americans who they feel like have done their duty in getting the first shot, getting the second shot. Now they're looking at being told that they need to get a third shot. And it just kind of gets to that point where you have people saying, not only where does this end, but is the United States really giving its best? And are we in a position where we're doing everything that we can to protect ourselves? And so I think that is a debate that you're going to continue to see evolve, especially in the months to come, especially when it is, you know, the individual states that are then fighting back against the federal government.
Joe Biden still alive at the time of interview?
That he is. And, you know, I think, to your point, I think that you can argue not only that he's old and senile, but also that Trump has a range of issues as well. I mean, unfortunately, we are in a situation in the United States where people continue to be in sort of this left versus right paradigm, where they feel like if you say something bad about one side, then that means that you automatically support the other side. And I'm here to tell you that you can criticize them both equally and that there is nothing wrong with that.
Remember her name, Rachel Blevins. She'll be in the Congress one day, and she won't turn up at $30,000 a night Met Gala, and she won't wear a daft dress sending a ridiculous slogan on the back of it, even though she'd look even nicer than AOC in that dress. Rachel Blevins.
Thank you, George.
Thank you for joining us. Let's hear from Anthony in Detroit. Go ahead, Anthony.
Hey, George. Yeah, well, it's sad. We only have one person in the U.S. Congress left who's said anything positive about Assange or that he should be released. And,
really?
You know, there were three last term, but two of them retired. So, yeah, only one guy left.
Unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty sad. And, you
what
know,
about the U.S. media? What does the U.S. media say about Assange, or do they just ignore it, like the British?
Oh, yeah, totally ignore it. Totally ignore it. If they do, they kind of try to go with the smears that have been discredited. So, yeah.
It's very hard to bear. Did you read the Yahoo News interview? And there's more, I think, in the Greystone project.
I didn't. I read a thread on Twitter by Kevin Gostola. Maybe I'll read that.
It's a long read. It's a long read, Anthony, but it is very well worth it. I'll tell you, it'll make the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end.
Yeah. I thought it was kind of old news, but I guess maybe they have better sources now for it.
Well, there are better sources, more sources, and it is old news for thee and me, but not for the millions that read Yahoo. This is a whole new audience that has now been treated to a devastating indictment of hysterical U.S. government with accomplices like the British, conspiracy to murder, kidnap, illegally render on the streets of London, create an international incident beyond anything that's ever been seen, even in a Cold War drama. You won't find the US, British, and Russian diplomats shooting at each other on the London streets.
Oh my gosh, it's mafia level activity. So, all right,
It
let's
is.
keep fighting, George.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Thanks, Anthony, for that. Let's hear from James in London. Hello, James, are you there? Here's the numbers, by the way. I know I'm late in giving them to you, but we've had a busy show. If you're in the United Kingdom, it's absolutely free, remember. It's 08081 965522. That's 08081 965522. If you're in the United States, or Canada for that matter, again, it's toll-free, costs you nothing. It's +1 844 944 3344. And you can also email the show, and of course, you can tweet me. Shall I go to Imran in Washington, the man that we made famous last week? Go ahead, Imran.
Hello, it's me, George Galloway, from last Sunday.
You're on the air. I remember you well, so do many others. Go on.
I just came to tell you three important things. I'm not going to waste your time, I promise you. The first thing I want to tell you is that my views on bin Laden will never change, irrespective of how hard you try to silence me on this issue.
Irrespective of fact. When you said you were a deist, is he your deity?
For me, he's a hero and a martyr for the Muslim world.
Even though you're an ex-Muslim. You're an ex-Muslim.
Yeah, but that doesn't stop me from being influenced by
But
him.
you're entitled to nominate heroes for the Muslim world. Are you a provocateur, Imran? Is it your purpose to discredit Islam and Muslims?
I'm not a provocateur. I see the world. I see things differently. For me, terrorism has a serious meaning, and actually, in Islam, there is revenge. Actually, revenge is sanctioned. I know you'll never admit this because, of course, you don't want to lose your audience. But in Islam, I can actually give you the specifics if you want.
I tell people what I believe, whether I lose them or I don't lose them. If you knew anything about me, you'd already know that. So your 3 points are: one, that bin Laden is a hero for the Muslim world, and you feel entitled as an ex-Muslim, which, as far as I know, would make you a dead Muslim in a Muslim country. You are entitled to nominate their heroes. What's your second point?
The second point I was going to tell you is that revenge is indeed sanctioned in Islam.
Not revenge against innocent people. No, it isn't.
No, but I can give you the specifics if you want.
There are no specifics that sanction revenge against innocent people. There are none. You're supposed to be the ex-Muslim, but I actually know your religion, former religion, better than you do.
There's the Quranic verse 545, Surah Al-Maida.
Saying?
Surah Al-Maida is Quranic verse 545, and it specifically talks about taking revenge against your enemy, an eye for an eye revenge.
Against your enemy, not against innocent people who happen to be on a bus in a country that you are at war with.
No,
I hope your third point is better than your second.
Well, for me, terrorism
quickly
has
make it. Quickly make it. You are wasting my time, as you promised you wouldn't.
Yeah, and the third point I was going to make is that terrorism for me has a more serious meaning.
What, then murdering innocent people isn't terrorism?
For me, terrorism means when you impose sanctions on other people's countries, like the one in Syria and Iraq. Well, terrorism for me is when you...
That might very well also be terrorism. That does not negate the point that murdering innocent people is also terrorism. You are a troubled man, Imran. I don't know what your purpose is. If you're sincere, you're already on the watch list. If you are a provocateur, then you deserve nothing but contempt. Andrea is in Switzerland. Let's hear from her. Go ahead, Andrea.
It's actually a hymn.
I beg your pardon, Andrea. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you because I'm a philosophy student in Switzerland, and we are discussing at the moment in my seminar the Australian philosopher Peter Singer, who makes the argument, which sounds plausible at first, that if you see a drowning child in a pool of water, you must, as a moral duty, go in and save it. But you must also save it if it is a million miles away. For example, if it's drowning in India, you are sitting in the UK. And he uses this as an argument to say that we in the West who are rich have a moral duty to basically donate our money, which we normally would use to spend on luxuries, and give it to charity to save drowning children or relieve famines. And the reason I want to ask you about this is because I think this argument is very abstract, but if you actually take it seriously, it leads to the invasion and occupation of other people's countries, because it makes the responsibility, or let me put it this way, it pretends that it is a responsibility of Western countries to improve the lives of people in third world countries. And I think it's rather dangerous to advance such an argument. And I was wondering what you thought.
It's a very tantalizing prospect as a subject, though the hour is late, my friend. But the first point I have to make to you is that a very large number of our people, if not in Switzerland, certainly in Britain, certainly in the United States, are not rich. The idea that the West is rich is born from a survey of the rich in Western countries. A great number of people in Britain are feeding themselves from food banks. Millions of our children are living in poverty. And to argue that they have some duty, responsibility to a drowning child in India will not progress very far. As a matter of fact, there's a big question as to why exactly Britain is giving aid to countries like China and India, who both have economies considerably larger and richer than ours. So this charity thing doesn't really do it for me. I'm for justice rather than charity. As to your second point, it's a very good one. The argument of Singer could and maybe even was a part of the mindset of the hated Tony Blair in his Chicago speech in '98, in which he developed the nostrum, which has no basis in international law, but which has ever since been cited as a rules-based order that nobody agreed to, has no legal basis, in which he argued that we have a right, might argue an obligation, to protect people in other countries from circumstances that we have deemed as inappropriate, a point that Tom McGregor made earlier. You announce that we have a rules-based order, except we wrote the rules, you never agreed to them, and we are the judge, jury, and executioner over whether you broke those rules. Now, this RTP, as it's called, developed by Blair and Clinton, has been the basis for the invasions of Yugoslavia, Sierra Leone, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, Syria, although not Yemen. That's a different kettle of fish. So maybe again, another time, we'll have time to discuss this, Andrea. Thanks for making that call. let's hear from James in London. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, you was talking to that other guy who said he was an ex-Muslim.
Yes.
And you said about killing innocent people, yeah?
Yes.
Well, when there's a war, I think the British have killed innocent people as well. Not just in Afghanistan, they've done it in many countries. You know, the army have
I'm
gone
probably
in.
not the person you need to teach that to, James.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, what you're saying there, you're sort of trying to make an argument with him about killing innocent people.
Terrorism is terrorism, whether it's carried out by a man in a turban in the Tora Bora or a man in a suit in Whitehall or Washington.
Yeah, but what do you expect? I mean, if you go into a country and kill innocent people, they're going to retaliate. Of course they are. If you're in the street and a man punches you in the face, you're going to retaliate against him.
I'm going to retaliate against the man that punched me in the face. I'm not going to grab a woman in another part of town and beat her to death because a man punched me in another part of town.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but what I'm saying is it's a war. I mean, you know, when you're in a war, there's many people involved.
But there are rules in war, and more importantly, in the context of Imran in Washington, there are rules in his former religion. Hold on. There are rules in his former religion which prohibit punching a girl in another part of town because a man punched you in a different part of town. That's my point. I don't need lectures from you about whether Bush and Blair and everyone that came after them are also terrorists. I know that. I'm the man that spoke it more clearly than anyone else. Go on, James.
Okay, right. You know, at the end of the day, war is war. No one plays by the rules in war. When there's a war, they say, oh, you can't do this. You've got to capture the person, bring him back, and put him on trial and blah, blah, blah. You know, they don't do that. If they catch someone in war and they bring him back to prison and they hold him, they don't play by the rules. They torture him, they beat him, you know, for anger. That's what happens. No one country, when they're at war, will they play by the rules.
And anyone who does that is a criminal, a war criminal. Whether they're in a suit in Whitehall or in a turban in the Tora Bora. What is hard to understand about that point? That is my view. What's hard about it?
No, listen. I'll tell you something, right? Okay? The reason why we've got wars going on, this is my personal experience, okay? This is what I see, is there's too much media. Way too much. You look at it, if you look at like 50 years ago, you had the BBC, you had your radio, right? There weren't very many radio stations putting out news. Now, you've got people making their front room or their kitchen or their living room, and they're making it look like a professional radio station, and they're blurting out news. You know, look at the one where they said about the guy, he got hanged from a helicopter, right? I think that was CNN. They go, oh, they're hanging people from a helicopter. Well, the guy wasn't hanging from a helicopter. He wasn't executed from a helicopter. He was actually hanging on. They were airlifting him out. So, you know, news and news reporters.
That's fake news. You're talking about fake news.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Plenty of it. There's plenty of it, James. But luckily, you've come to the only place, perhaps, where the news is not fake. Thanks for your call. In this week in 1955, that's my era, James Dean died in a car crash a day after completing his last film. My goodness. How unlucky was that? What was it called? A, East of Eden. B, Rebel Without a Cause. C, Giant. Well, answer right after this.
Radio Sputnik.
Now let me give you the phone numbers. If you're in the UK, the number is 08081 96 5522. It's entirely free nowadays. Ditto if you're in the United States. +1 844-944-3344.
They're looking up to the wrong role models, and that's what's causing them to get into gang culture and look up to folk that are stabbing and shooting each other.
That's why I love that picture on the front of The Voice of Sancho, of Sterling, of Saka, and of Rashford. I loved it because it showed young black boys, this is what you should aspire to.
Better than every other country.
Well, we are better than every other country.
Look in the mirror.
No, we
you're
are.
not treated.
Tell me a country that's better.
Yeah, but that means nothing to me.
Well, it may not. It's a fair point.
That means nothing to me and my children. At the end of the day, that is a white man's problem, a white woman's problem. It's about time you stop ignoring it and denying it and deal with it. You're causing a lot of harm.
I'm causing a lot of harm. Thank you for that call.
But
look, I'm sympathetic, Kieran, to that point of view, and I'm fully seized of the fact that there is sexual fluidity openly expressed now in a way that there wasn't when I was young, and I have no animus towards even people that like sex with pans. I just won't allow my 4-year-old. Or my 7-year-old or my 10-year-old to be filled with this at school.
That is a straw man. You show me a single teacher that can teach a 4-year-old child about sex. If you can show me that, I will ring the police before you.
Well, you may not be aware.
Prove me.
Kieran, you may not be aware. Kieran, let me speak. You may not be aware of the story that broke this week. Kieran, please be quiet for a minute.
Moats is the best. Keep going, George. It's the only way.
God bless you. No, as long as I've got breath, I'll keep going.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
In this week, in 1955, James Dean died in a car crash a day after completing his last film, which was called Giant. Unfortunately, it has not assumed a giant position in movie history. Indeed, I now realize, perhaps for the first time, I have never seen a James Dean film, even though I looked like him most of my life. Now, Progressive Path, the clue was in the name, says, came on after a hiatus. Looks like Galloway has now done a complete 180. Nothing but a pro-Brexit, pro-Tory stooge in the hands of the privileged class. That's me, can't you see me? I'm bound and gagged by the privileged class here on the mother of all talk shows on the RT and Sputnik network. But Progressive Path adds, Rayner is a hero. I'll tell you what, Mr. Progressive Path, are you a gutless coward, or are you going to call the show and defend your smear and slander? Now we've got young James Giles with us for the last part of the show, and I'm very glad, James, that you could make it. Let's start with Angela Rayner.
Yes.
Is she a red in tooth and claw class fighter, as Progressive Path thinks? Or was this a cheap publicity stunt to say, I'm here in the next Labour leader elections? Certainly thousands of people voted for her tonight. All of a sudden, she was at 5%, and then she was at 55%. Thousands voted for her. Somebody must like her.
Well, evidently so. I mean, it would appear that her latest media, beg your pardon, her latest comments have actually, thank you, sorry, I had my own voice in my ear, it's incredibly off-putting that's better.
It's like GB News here.
It was just for a moment. Her latest comments are obviously made to provoke a reaction from the Labour membership and really set out her stall when the inevitable time comes that Keir Starmer
What is that
has
stall?
to stand down.
I can't speak right. I'm vulgar. I'm a screeching fishwife, throwing insults and hate speech at everyone that doesn't yet agree with me. Is that a stall that many people are going to be queuing up at to buy?
Well, I mean, the Labour membership is ever more woke, ever more faux left, if you like. And so the kind of comments that Angela Rayner came out with at conference will have gone down an absolute treat. Tory scum, that kind of thing. You just need to take one brief look at social media to see the anger and the, frankly, rudeness of a whole swathe of Labour members. And it's exactly those kind of people that I think she's pitching to. The very people that mean that Rosie Duffield doesn't feel safe to come to her own party's conference. I mean, you were an MP almost 30 years.
Because she insisted that a man cannot become a woman by merely identifying as such.
Quite. I mean, it would have been unfathomable 30 years ago that an MP did not feel safe to attend their own party conference. Not wanting to attend is a different matter altogether, but to not feel physically safe, I mean, there's something going very wrong there for sure.
Labour is on one level veering towards the cliffs of extremism, and yet on another level, the much more important level, about the big things in society, it's moving more and more to the right. So that, for example, Keir Starmer pledged in his leadership campaign that he supported the nationalisation of energy distribution, something that was actually a Butskellite common ground in Britain for many decades after the Second World War. He's reneged on that. In fact, denies that he even ever supported it.
Well, let's be quite clear. Keir Starmer said that he supported common ownership of public goods. Now, to you and I, of course, that means nationalisation. And I'm sure to most of the people tuning in here, whether they're British or across the pond, would take common ownership to mean in the public's hands. But no, according to Sir Keir Starmer, former Director of Public Prosecutions, a very good grasp of the English language, one would therefore expect and hope, that means something just a little bit different. Doesn't mean nationalisation, doesn't mean public ownership. He can't tell us what common ownership, by his definition, does mean, of course. But, he's completely gone back on that, which is why I think you've got people now being more vocal on the Labour conference floor, coming out against Starmer. It appears to really have shifted back toward that Corbyn-y kind of viewpoint. David Evans at conference yesterday stood up and said, we all have a reason for joining Labour. Do you remember yours? And a whole crowd of people chanted, Jeremy Corbyn, which probably wasn't the response the Blairite General Secretary was looking for.
No, it's true that down on the conference floor there are quite a few ragged remnants, some of them very ragged, of the Corbyn period, but they have no power, as the results of the votes are now steadily making clear. The reviled David Evans is the General Secretary for life now, until he goes to the House of Lords, even though a big push was made to try and stop him from being confirmed by the conference. But he was comfortably confirmed, 60 to 40. The next Labour leader will be picked by a new system which effectively rigs and gerrymanders it against any kind of Corbyn number two, even an improved Corbyn, polished Corbyn, ever being nominated, ever being on the ballot paper.
Well, let's be quite clear. If Sir Keir Starmer does get his rule changes through, which would mean that any candidate wanting to succeed him would need to get 20% of Labour MPs to nominate them to get on the ballot paper. If those rules had been in place in the last Labour leadership election, the ballot paper would have consisted solely of Sir Keir Starmer, neither Rebecca Long-Bailey nor Lisa Nandy got enough nominations that would have taken them over that threshold. So it completely rules out any Corbyn mark.
Andy Burnham wouldn't have been on the ballot paper when Jeremy Corbyn won it.
No.
Jeremy Corbyn, of course, wouldn't have been on it. He only got the 40 threshold by the skin of his teeth in the last moments. John Prescott would never have been on the ballot paper against Tony Blair. It's a fundamental shift in power.
Oh, it really is. And, you know, put it this way. If every single Labour MP were to nominate someone in a leadership election, assuming they all nominated in an equal proportion, there could be no more than 5 candidates ever for Labour leadership, and that's assuming all MPs nominate, which they never do, and they all were to nominate proportionally, which after Corbyn, when, of course, if you remember, many MPs lent their support to Corbyn to get him over the line, that's never happening again. You know, no one is ever lending their support.
They later called themselves morons.
They did indeed.
Germany. Any breaking news out of there?
Yeah, there is in Germany. So newspapers in Berlin are reporting that Armin Laschet, the leader of the Christian Democratic Union, which is
Merkel's successor.
Merkel's successor, they've governed Germany now for almost 2 decades. He may not actually win a seat in the German parliament, in the Bundestag, which would be major. That's never happened before in Germany for what would be the government leader or potentially leader of the opposition to actually lose their seat. So if that is the case and he doesn't become the Chancellor and the coalition talks are likely to be long and drawn out, and Angela Merkel could well become the longest serving German Chancellor ever, given just how fractured German politics.
So will she need to stay on while all these talks are taking place?
She will need to stay on as the caretaker Chancellor. And if the talks go on beyond the 17th of December, she will overtake Kohl as the longest-serving German Chancellor in history. But if Armin Laschet and the CDU don't take the coveted chancellorship, there is now a very real possibility that he won't be able to lead the opposition in the German parliament because he himself won't be an MP.
Wow, that's amazing.
Let's
hear from Norma, the legend in Bristol. Norma's got a view on the Labour conference. Go ahead, Norma.
Yeah, I have. George, can I just say something funny at the beginning?
Yeah, of course.
You were on about Enid Blyton, and have you ever read Mr. Pink Whistle books?
No.
He was magic, Mr. Pink. He was Enid Blyton, and he was magic, and your children will love it if you
Okay,
can find it.
I'll make a note of that and do that, because we're running out now. We've now read all of the famous 5, bar one book. I'm on the last book.
Oh, they're great. They're great adventures.
I think so.
Yeah. Anyway, I was watching the Labour Party conference on YouTube this afternoon, and the debate was on anti-Semitism, and it was so one-sided. Margaret Hodge, did you see it?
No, I couldn't bring... you
it
wild
was awful.
horses couldn't drag me to watch it.
Well, do you know, it was awful. Margaret Hodge and nearly all the speakers were apologising and said no more, and this has been a terrible time for the Labour Party. But lots of left-wing Jewish members, as well as like Chris Williamson, as you know, they've been expelled.
Oh, expelled, yeah. Labour has expelled more Jewish people than any party in British history.
Oh, but
they're just the wrong type of Jews.
Exactly, but I mean, it was so one-sided, George. But I just wonder, really, there'll be some more debates tomorrow, and I do like watching a bit on YouTube, although I was disillusioned with that. Whether people who might oppose any debates will be given a hearing, because it does seem to me...
It's always been rigged, Norma, but...
yeah, it's worse now.
Now it's positively farcical.
Well, it is.
Was Margaret Hodge speaking from the floor or from the platform?
Oh, it's because when I switched it on, it's about 4 o'clock. I think she was on the platform, but there were several
On
other...
what basis was she on the platform?
I don't know. There were quite a lot.
She's not an elected member of the National Executive Committee. She's not a front bench spokesperson of the Labour. She's just a backbench MP.
Yeah, well, don't quote me, but I just have a feeling I
very
did see
interesting.
it.
Very interesting. Well, you're watching it, so I don't have to.
Oh,
Norma.
it was awful. It was awful.
That is a public service. I'm very grateful to you for it. Norma, thanks for that call. She's got a point. the Labour conference has always been rigged. I've only spoken at it once in I don't know how many decades of being entitled to speak, and how many times I've spent holding up my hand to catch the chairperson's eye and failed. But it's become, I don't know how to describe it, it's become slightly farcical now.
Oh, it absolutely has. I mean, you've got Margaret Beckett, who's chair of the NEC, obviously a Labour grandee.
Dame Margaret Beckett.
Indeed, yes.
Whom you speak?
It is indeed, of course, party grandee in their books, who's been chairing the proceedings this week, and has herself, despite her extensive knowledge and years of experience of the Labour Party and its internal processes and wranglings, actually been breaching the standing orders. I'll give you just one such example. Every year the NEC produce a report to conference, as I'm sure you'll no doubt be aware.
Yeah.
And the standing orders of the Labour Party say that that report has to be voted on by a show of hands. So Dame Margaret Beckett, being chair of proceedings, said once the report had been presented, "Are we in agreement?" There was a murmur of meh.
Yeah.
And she said, "Agreed, next item of business." And after that, delegate after delegate came up and said, "Madam Chair, you're breaking standing orders. We need a vote on this by a show of hands." To which, of course, she was saying, you know, "I'm saving you time. I'm doing this in your interest. You know, get off the stage." To which the next delegate had come up and say exactly the same thing. But it's a farce, because if Corbyn had been doing that while the left controlled the NEC, there would have been uproar, not just in the Labour Party conference hall, but the national media would have been all over it. You know, Labour Party breaking its own rules. How can they be trusted to abide by the laws of the land if they won't abide by their own rules? And one more example of that, of course, is the fact that despite Keir Starmer just last week calling for the national minimum wage to be raised to £10, how much are conference stewards being paid this year at Labour conference? £9.50. So they're not even practising what they preach.
You couldn't make it up. Let's hear from Barry in Nottingham. Go ahead, Barry.
Oh, hello, George. Angela Rayner. Just my observations. I don't think she's ever going to cut it with the middle classes in southern England, do you?
I really don't. I really don't. Or the working class in the north, who prefer a bit more refinement in their representation.
Well, it's the southern seats Labour need to win the majority at the next election.
Yeah.
And I don't know what you think, but the only reason Tony Blair won 3 elections was by pretending to be a Tory, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, up to a point. I get what you're saying. There's 2 audiences, Barry. And as James was saying earlier, she can appeal only to one. And it's worked.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got a Pavlovian reaction from people like Progressive Path, who did turn out to be a gutless coward and hasn't phoned the show. You've got this Pavlov, somebody saying vulgar, ugly things about the Tories. Hooray, I'll support them. That's its point. But of course, as you rightly say, that would mean going into an election with a person that talks like that and failing completely to win over the people whose votes you need. Barry, very good call. Thanks for it. John in Yorkshire is the last caller. Go ahead, John.
Oh, thanks for having me on, George. I've been watching your show for a while now.
Thanks.
My question is very simple. I live in Leeds, but I'm from Harrogate. And the factory of Yorkshire tea is there in Starbeck. I noticed you're drinking the Yorkshire tea out of that cup. Is it Yorkshire tea, and do you get sponsored by them?
It's the opposite, John.
What?
It is the opposite. It is not and never has been Yorkshire tea. It is Rooibos, Red Bush in a Yorkshire tea mug. So not only do I not get sponsored, I get the pleasure of telling everyone, including you, I'm not drinking Yorkshire tea, so don't sponsor me.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Appreciate
Thank
it, John. Finally, going back to this German issue, they'll need to get a new leader then. If he's lost his seat, they'll have to pick a new leader. And they had enough difficulty picking that leader.
Well, they did indeed, of course. Before Armin Laschet, you had AKK, who was Merkel's initial preferred successor. She fell flat with the German electorate, just as it appears Armin Laschet has. Now, there's still a chance. It's not a great chance, but there is a chance that the CDU may fall short in some seats, and so he will get in via that top-up method. But it's looking increasingly difficult for the CDU to even stay in government at all. The SPD, the equivalent of the Labour Party in Germany, have made real significant gains. The Greens are up to their best ever result in Germany. The Left Party, risen from the ashes of the Communist Party in East Germany, is set to stay in Parliament. At one point, it was looking shaky because you have to get more than 5% of the vote to get seats in Parliament. But the postal votes that have been counted so far, which make up about 40% of the votes cast in this German election, which is far higher than usual for the obvious reasons, have proven good for them. So they're set to stay in Parliament. So you could actually even see a fully left-wing government in Germany made up of the Labour Party, the Greens, and the left, which really is the CDU's nightmare, and indeed what Armin Laschet has been warning about for quite some time, which is, if you vote for the equivalent of the Labour Party, you're voting to let the hard left in. It's a very similar campaign to that run by Theresa May in 2017. Corbyn's a threat to national security, coalition of chaos, and it didn't end out well for Theresa May, of course. Labour got their biggest increase in vote share since 1945 in our election. And indeed, it hasn't worked in Germany. The left are making significant gains, even if it is a Keir Starmer, Tony Blairish iteration of the SPD in Germany. They're still quite centrist, but they really are making gains, and the CDU are set for a period out of government.
I think so. It's hard for them to stay in government when their vote has fallen so much. Their leader may even have been voted out of Parliament. It's most likely to be what the Germans call a traffic light government of red, if the SDP can remotely be described as red, green, but the amber would be the Free Democrats, because they'd need them. They won't take Die Linke, I don't think. That would be a step too far for the SPD. They'd be accused of facilitating the entry into power of former communists from East Germany. It's more likely to be the SPD, the Greens, and the Free Democrats, who've done, at least on the exit poll, quite well. But thanks for talking us through it.
Not at all, pleasure.
Because not everybody knows about German politics, and not everyone is as seized as they should be about the importance of those elections. Is there any chance of Merkel changing her mind and staying on?
Well, there is a chance, of course, that no party will emerge actually able to form a coalition. The FDP, the Liberals, have a fair, significant chunk of ideological differences with the Greens. And so there'll be a lot of tension there. So the Greens, recognising their performance, will want a significant dowry to go into government, because there is a price for doing so. So we could find ourselves back at the polls before too long in Germany. And should Armin Laschet fail to get a seat, Merkel could just stay on. Who knows? I mean, nothing's impossible in this world.
Stay on, Angela. That will be the cry from the European Union, that's for sure. Instability in Germany would be a serious problem indeed for the European Union project, especially if Macron loses his election next year, which cannot be ruled out. British politics, I'm afraid, has sunk still further this weekend. Not only has an incompetent, absurdly incompetent government now stayed in power and likely to remain so, but the very idea of a Labour opposition has been discredited beyond any credibility. It's been marvellous for me. Hope it was for you. If it was, join me and Roger Waters next week at the same time. Listen.